Good morning, everyone, everywhere. Thanks for listening. We are here today on the 8th of January. This is actually my father's 100th anniversary if he were alive, but as he is not, it's still the 100-year anniversary of his birth date. So thanks, Dad, for doing what you did to have me here now. So last week, I said a couple of things, and re-listening to the introduction, I wanted to clarify because I was a little off base, and that isn't unusual. One of the things is our conversation is about letting things be as they are. It's starting to recognize that things are as they are. If we align our thinking with how things are, it obviously provides us a much more stable basis in our thinking, which gives us a much better platform to actually gauge the thinking we're doing in relation to other things beyond the thinking we're doing. What that effectively means is that thoughts are thoughts. Truth is true, reality is reality, fantasy is fantasy. It's letting things be what they are before we launch into all these other complications we create by thinking of them as other things. Somebody's got some background noise. So reality is reality, fantasy, etc. Delusion is insanity and only occurs once we think something isn't what it is. So we see it as something different. And one way we do that in thinking is to think that our thinking is truth and reality. So when we make that leap, we're delusional in our thinking about our thinking, which is then becomes the basis of our thinking, which is not healthy, obviously, and not natural. The consequence of that thinking is that we start to think who we are is what we think. Because if we're the creators of reality now, having translated our thoughts as being real and true, because we conclude that they are, then all of a sudden we become only what we think. That means when I think my thoughts are real, the basis of my feelings are what I am. So when I feel bad and wrong, that's who I am. I'm thinking about it as who I am, rather than seeing it as something being done by my thinking. My bad and wrong is in the thoughts. That's not to say there can't be some external issue going on that's bad and wrong that I'm registering, but we're talking about the internal dialogue that we're creating before we even begin to consider what's happening around us. If we're not considering what's happening in us, the chance that we're seeing things accurately around us is very, very slim if we're misperceiving how we're doing what we're doing within our own thinking. So that's what we're focused on. So when I think my thoughts are true and real, I'm delusional in my thinking and immediately begin to believe that because I'm the creator of reality, I become what I think. And that way, when I feel bad and I feel wrong and I feel loathing and I feel self-hatred and I feel self-doubt, I think that's who I am. The self I'm thinking about is my thinking, literally thinking of itself. So thinking of itself thinks of ego. So I talked about last week, I said that when we introduce our thought to our greater self, which really isn't our greater self, it's our greater knowing awareness, that we can begin to introduce our thinking to by allowing our greater knowing awareness to be our greater knowing awareness and recognizing that it is always known and that we are always aware of it. And that if we allow our thinking now to think in relation to that awareness and knowing, we're not introducing it to a greater self, because a self is always identified as an individual, subjective sort of thing. And there can't be something individual within an absolute state of knowing awareness. So I would suggest it's something we share, not something we each have individually. We may appear to have it individually because we're thinking about it with the brains we have that seem to be independent, but in fact, our bodies are dependent on everyone else and everything else at the same time. So the idea that we're separate is just a very shallow observatory concept relative to the absolute essence of the fact that we're all interacting with everything that provides anything that we need, like the oxygen and the platform, the gravity to keep us on the planet, and the food that we get and all that kind of stuff. Everything is interactive. and connected. So the other thing is that the difference between what's natural and what's unnatural is one is easy because it's natural and the other one's hard because it's unnatural. And what we're here to do is not try to figure out what truth and reality is, because we can presume that truth and reality is true and real and just resign ourselves to that. Simple. But if we can apply ideas in directions that work, it's a pretty good indication that they're working on the basis of the idea being principled or having some basis. Doesn't mean the words are going to ever add up sufficiently to define everything that that thought or that idea could potentially contain. But it isn't necessary to contain it within the thinking if the essence of our knowing is already knowing. If it already has it, our ability to use it is beginning to actually just exercise principled thinking in relation to it, and notice that we have a much greater awareness and a much more stable platform to begin to think from when we do that. So it's like mathematics. If you apply the principles, the solutions tend to work. They don't get more problematic and complicated. But if you don't apply principles and continue to try to fix math with the wrong ideas, it's going to seem like math is very complicated, which it isn't. It's very simple. It's only complicated when we misapply the application. So what we're doing is looking at how to apply applications. And that, what does that mean? Interact with people on that basis. Start to look at your own experience as something that you're having. And when it comes to the things you're doing that aren't relating to things around you while you're relating to everything, the closer relationship you're having is to what you're thinking and how you're thinking, is to start to address that in more accurate terms. You'll start seeing that that greater sense of knowing automatically becomes obvious rather than acting oblivious to it. It becomes obvious, starts to become obvious because it's there and we're utilizing it because we're applying thoughts in directions that are principled rather than constantly looking to more thinking to finally solve this seemingly never-ending problem. And the problem is that we're chronically addicted to our thinking process to come to the conclusion. And so we can conclude thinking is always going to be thinking about what we think, which is always going to be extremely limited. While if we begin considering that thinking is actually a part of something absolutely unlimited, our thinking immediately starts to open up because we're not challenging it with an idea that isn't true. Those choices we make are the one thing we control. And once we do something that's out of control, that has no basis, out of control and unmanageability is actually trying to control something that has no control because it doesn't exist. It's an illusion in our own thinking that we're riding a bull, and that bull is making life very difficult because it's hard to sit on like a cowboy in a rodeo. It's just fantasy thought of as reality.
That makes a lot of sense, Jerry.
So anyway, those were some basic points, and I'm going to do what I can to start to melt these things down. So my own verbosity and ability to talk about them at lengths in the way that I tend to, largely because I've been exploring them at those lengths, and it seems common to me, but I'm not sure it's that common to introduce in a conversation that is exposing ideas for the first time, perhaps, to people. So I'll do what I can to boil that stuff down and continue to do that. But anyway, welcome. And what's happening? Other than everything, what's happening?
That makes a lot of sense, Jerry.
Well, thank you, Anthony. And I know that to the degree that it confirms so many of the application of it. You know, we have that tendency of saying you give somebody an inch and they take a mile. Since we're dealing with nature, if you give an inch, you get a mile because it just works. And there's something awkward about it because it seems so unfamiliar to not have to control and micromanage things after years and years and years of obsessively thinking about them and thinking about what we have to do to maintain them. Because most of my life had been spent trying to create new ways of feeling better about what I was doing that was worse. You know, meditation, running, working out, all this kind of stuff. Drinking certainly was one of them. Drugs were another one. But on a more after recovery basis, once I started getting sober and wasn't drinking and didn't feel the compelling need to drink and drug and all that, and I was free of that, it became very obvious that the condemnation was a deeper, seemingly deeper issue, but it was very superficial because I was witnessing it and experiencing it daily.
So it seems like you broke it down much simpler today. And can you just break it down one more time, even smaller, so that it's even more simple? What is it really that you're saying? The simplest, smallest, the shortest version of that.
What do you hear that's complicated that would have that question asked?
Well, I hear the simplification, which I like, which is that instead of trying to figure out, and is this right? How does this fit in there? Just let it be what it's being. And then just, it doesn't have to go anywhere. It could just be where it's at. I don't have to categorize it, put it somewhere.
Well, and even simpler than that, Anthony, is seeing that if things are already doing what they're doing what they're doing without our thinking.
Right.
We may be thinking while we're doing them, but our thinking isn't yet imposing on them because we're not thinking about them.
Yeah, that seems pretty basic, pretty simple. I like that.
So, and Gabe may be able to talk better to the point. You know, Einstein said when we observe something, we have an effect on it. And I wonder if our own misobservation isn't what affects it, because we're actually not seeing the thing that's there. We're seeing what we're thinking of it. And that creates an imposition on that thing because there is an interactive consequence to the thinking we do. We impact things around us. And I would suggest that we impact everything and everyone with everything that we do in thought and otherwise. Thought's the basic action that humans take. And I would say even more basic than that is the choice to think, because I don't tend to think about things that I don't choose to want. The thinking that I do that's voluntary tends to always be in relation to something I want from someone or something. I want to get something. And that could include wanting to get less of something too.
So yeah, Jack, Einstein used to joke, is the moon not shining when you don't see it? You know, is the moon not orbiting us when you don't see it, as a rebuttal to that thing? But it's really about quantum entanglement. And when you start looking at things at a quantum level, you're looking at it affects it. And is it really there? And Schrodinger's cat and all that.
Yeah.
Kind of stuff. So it's like, but I think something that I had this week, a minor setback, I think, but when you're in that mode of thinking what's real is real by your own thinking, I keep telling myself, these are lies, this is not true. But it took like a day for my brain to sort of come back to, okay, it's not true. But when you're in that feedback cycle, it's seemingly hard to shake the Etch-a-Sketch. You know,
Yeah.
it's I can't. You're staring at the math problem, 3 + 3, it's 6, but your brain is still saying 7 and it just will not, unlatch. And that's what I dealt with this week a little bit.
Well, and one of the issues, Gabe, that we've discussed and is sometimes hard to see is that, if the moon is still shining and it doesn't require us to look at it to know that, making that concession in our own thinking is starting to see that we're probably thinking things we don't even think we're thinking. And when we start to become aware of them, it doesn't mean we're seeing the chronic nature of that thinking in all its entirety, but we're starting to simply witness that something's going on I don't even think is happening until I feel this pain and this agony and this sort of mental obsession. But to see it is the beginning of starting to actually concede it, right? Actually being able to stand there and say, wow, I can't simply stop it with a quick fix anymore. So I must be starting to look at it in a way that is looking at what's been really sick for me to imagine. I haven't even been doing it. So when I start looking at it, I think it should just go away immediately, when in fact, I have years and years and years of stress in my body built up that are charged with this perpetual maintenance, that start to actually challenge the presumptions I've made in relation to every moment I've been resisting what I've been doing. That starts to unravel the entire history in our bodies. And that confrontation is is my experience. I had a panic attack, as I told you. My whole body went gray.
Those few sentences past, Jack, are exactly my battle. Exactly. Just years of childhood trauma, although I'm getting towards 50. And it's still, I still have to have that chaos of the craziness and the unrealness, setting so things up in my mind so that I can fail and say, see, I told you so. And all of these things that are just set up almost intrinsically.
So let's look at your words.
Mm.
If you think they're set up and intrinsic in your thinking, that's helping you create a form to reinforce them as though they have some essence that now has become the form you're creating and the narrative you're using to give yourself that impression.
Yeah, I love that story. It's part of my drinking. It's part of the woe is me. It's part of the "I told you so." It's part of all of that. And
isn't it interesting, though, that we would forsake love as an absolute state of being in the name of loving things that are killing us? We use it in exactly the opposite direction, because that reversal of fortune and that twist of fate that we actually cause in our own twisted thinking begins to project all of these things according to what we're choosing, simply to reflect what we're doing. And we either have a choice to look at it accurately or begin to continue to buy the lie that what we're thinking about it now becomes true and real. And as a result, it's intrinsic and it's impossible. And I've held it so long, I can't let all those kind of things just continue to reinforce the story. And they're always done in the present moment. So one of the other things, Gabe, to consider that we've kind of broached in the last couple of months, and I think is interesting, is that no alcoholic suffers from the second drink. They suffer from taking the first drink, right?
Yeah.
So the stopping up, when we've been so used to trying to stop this by feeling better about it,
yes,
that we've kind of forgot it's the starting of it that we're struggling with and suffering from. It's the beginning of it. It's not the end of it. It's not the consequence and the symptom. It's the actual source of the disease, which is, why do I keep, if I say I love this story, I'm going to continue to repeat it in the name of love, when in fact it's really in the name of self-loathing and self-hate and all those other things, because I hate this self I think I am, because it's not who I am. I know better. Why would I hate it? People, you very seldom hear people talk about struggling with self-love. It doesn't tend to be that we struggle with things we like and love. It seems to be we struggle with things we claim to love that are killing us. And they're really stressing us. And we've been lying about it since the basic lie of thoughts being real and true is the basis of our thinking. We've continued to lie in different ways and make believe those things are now true. Those stories we tell, the depths we've held, even the idea that I'm holding into my body. Healing, my suspicion, is instantaneous. It doesn't take time. The time it takes is my willingness to continue to deny how things actually are in the name of continuing to maintain ideas I have that I don't even think I have, because I think I buried them and I kept them secret and I've kept them hidden so long that I think I'm the master of the universe by actually not exposing myself, rather than recognizing that all of those traits that I'm hiding are all causing blood, sweat, and tears that people are seeing. They're written on my face. I wear it on my sleeve. They're a pain in my neck and ass. My back hurts. They're heavy on my shoulders, heavy on my mind, heavy on my heart. We use all those terms, and they're all expressing some form of imposition or stress caused by resisting what's actually happening. And what's actually happening is nothing other than what I keep perpetuating in the thought about what's happening. There's nothing there that I'm not making up that has any imposition, because what's there in reality has no weight, has no condemnation, doesn't hate. It's pure love. It's weightless. And that feeling is very awkward when you start feeling it, because your stomach will feel like you're seasick a little bit, because you won't be bearing the weight and ignoring it. You're starting to see the queasiness of the movement and the fluidity rather than the stability of the feeling that seems so stuck and has no place to go. It literally becomes like the lava lamp. Everything's just kind of morphing and changing. And shifting, or an ocean. It's just moving fluidly back and
Yeah, I don't
forth.
want to spend too much time on me personally, but Jack, I think that something me and my sponsor worked on this week is I was having some problems at home with my relationships over the last years. Obviously, drinking a part of that. Those have become melded and returned, and then our house is finished. The kids are doing great. I had some negative thoughts about my career and my job and finances. Those have been resolved. It's like everything is going smoothly, and being with you guys is a complete help to everything. I love you guys so much, and it's like everything is running on all cylinders, and I'm ready to burn it down. So find some way to not be happy, to not feel connected to the infinite and all that stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's you're starting to be aware of the commitment we made a long time ago to claim superiority by actually destroying ourselves. We're
Yes.
trying to claim individuality and separateness and loneliness as our plight and strength by claiming to be completely independent and completely unreliable to everyone else and distinct in our own imagination. And to the point about focusing on you, Gabe, is that this thing that we do, given that our platform is identical, our DNA, our basic genetic makeup as humans is almost identical to the fraction of a percent.
Mm-hmm.
The variations are all in appearance and not basic substance. So the point is that what we do that seems unique to us tends to be what we're all doing with different faces, places, and times. So the benefit of this conversation is looking at it from the principled basis and saying, if that's a struggle that you see clearly, you offer other people en masse the chance to clearly see what they're doing in ways they might not think they're doing it, because you can't think what they're thinking, and they think as a result they're alone in their own thoughts, when in fact all they have is different faces, places, and times attached to the stories that are all identical to the excuses used to justify continuing to do the thing that's sick and insane.
Yeah, which has nothing to do with, like you said, the symptoms, the drugs, the sex, the alcohol, the whatever it is, gambling. It's like it's the spiritual fitness.
Consider this: the symptoms in sobriety are anxiety, stress, reactiveness, impulsiveness, and compulsions. They do not go away.
Yeah.
I don't know anybody in sobriety who doesn't have a compulsion or two.
Yeah.
I mean, it may come down to food becomes a big compulsion because it's not something we're asked to stop doing. It's not, drugs and alcohol, you didn't do them on any given day for the most part, unless you're delusional completely, like most of us were when we did it and thought we were doing the best thing. But, with food, you're asked to do it. With sex, you're not asked to stop having sex. You're not asked to stop breathing. You're not asked to stop being healthy. But all of those things can become other compulsions because they're attempts to escape into a preoccupation of thought into something, some action. And they're easy things to fall into. Sex is a very easy thing to fall into. If sex hurt, it wouldn't be that easy. But if you do it right, it doesn't hurt for a minute. And same with eating. There's a satisfaction to it. But if you do too much, eating doesn't help. It actually kills us. If you eat the wrong thing too much, it kills us. It's not healthy. So there's a moderation that naturally becomes apparent in what we're doing when we're thinking sanely. We're not chasing things to fulfill something that can't be fulfilled because we're continuing. It's like we're digging the hole and throwing the dirt over our shoulder back into the hole. And It just never gets dug. We keep trying and trying to try. We try to dig ourselves out of the hole. Think of that. That's a term. How do you dig yourself out of a hole? It's not even possible.
Stop digging.
Yes. How about walk out?
Yeah.
But that tendency, my experience is that the stress and the anxiety that I built in my neck, I've talked about the neck process I've been going through. I was almost at a point where I had to turn my shoulders to move my head. And I haven't done anything with any chiropractor, but as we've been talking these last couple of years, my neck has slowly loosened up. Like there's been a palpable release, and just having a conversation about things more accurately that has relieved the thoughts I have in my head about what's wrong and relieved me of a lot of the stress that was there. And as a result, my neck started, I get these, I had a pop in my head at one point that felt like a lightning bolt. And it released something on my left side just by turning my head sideways. And it was ready to go because I was no longer maintaining the stress. And it wasn't just what I was doing, it's what we've been doing collectively that has given me a lot of that assurance that there's something here that when we talk about openly, we share collectively the benefits and can't always see them. And one of the benefits is actually beginning to notice that when the circumstances you used to use, like the financial issues and the drinking and the relationship problem, when all those things are done and resolved, the problem isn't gone. You start seeing the problem really clearly. And that's very distressing to think that all the things you thought were the fixes that you needed to get right aren't right enough to actually fix it, but they're not quite treating the actual symptom. The honesty is what treats it. Facing it is what treats it. Actually beginning to be aware of it and seeing, oh, I actually know better, and taking a breath when I'm about to do something stupid might be a good start. The book says, pause, restrain of pen and tongue, And my sense is the honesty about it is really critical, not just in our conversation for 2 or 3 hours on a Sunday, but in the conversations we have regularly. And part of how that happened for me was beginning to say, I don't know that I even know how to say this because I've kept these kind of thoughts to myself so long, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you what I'm thinking. And I want you to know before you hear it, that this is a thought I have. It is a thought that I have. I am going to share a thought that I have. This isn't about you, and yet you're going to hear it about you because it's what I'm thinking about you. But I want you to know what I'm thinking. And boom, it just releases the chance. People are prepared, and then they start speaking. In my relationship with Katie, she started saying things to me that she had not said because she didn't think it might be polite or cordial or safe. And all of a sudden, we had a much more open conversation between us. And some of those openings, Gabe, are exactly what you're describing in terms of things that have been going on since she was a child, since I was a child. And to think those things don't impact me by pretending I'm hiding them, I'm ignoring the impact they're having by the hiding of them I'm doing. And I've gotten so used to it, I don't even know I'm doing it anymore. I'm numb to it until I begin to feel it in those instances where they become very obvious. And those obvious natures, those obvious disturbances are actually perfectly designed to get my attention. I'm begging for my attention in ways that I have never given attention. And so I'm doing something I've never done before in ways that I've never done. And it seems awkward. It seems uncomfortable because I've been trying to create a routine to pretend everything's okay for decades, when in fact, there's been a lot that hasn't been okay, that's been hurting and upsetting for good reason, because it's not healthy.
Yeah, so we have these tools laid before us, and how do we accurately employ them? And I really feel like missing 2 weeks in a row of you guys really made me feel wobbly. Not having these discussions is quite impactful on my mood and thinking.
I think it's finding them wherever we go. Like the book talks about practicing principles in all our affairs and starting to see that principles are prior to personalities, and that all of the personal issues that we tend to have are all being derived by this idea that we're separate and alone, rather than beginning to see. One of the big transitions that happened for me, Gabe, and exactly referring to what you're talking about, is when I started realizing that if there's an absolute source, it's not, I don't have it because I'm finally admitting it. Everyone has it, whether they're admitting it or not. And Bill Wilson said in the big book, if we went to the hospital and saw a sick friend, we wouldn't condemn them the way we condemn other people who are sick and struggling with mental problems and or drinking. To condemn them is to lose the chance to actually communicate and conversate with them and communion with them, and begin to realize, oh, if we have this nature that's absolute, and I begin to see that that's everyone else's nature, then the things I'm always struggling with are just what I'm thinking about what they're thinking. That's it. And it's never any more than that. Because if they already have a knowing nature, there's no struggle in that knowing nature. There's no self in that knowing nature. There's no independence in that knowing nature. And yet there's no condemnation in that knowing nature. It's interesting that when it comes to an absolute nature, it isn't a choice, but there's also no contempt. There's no condemnation. The choices we make that cause condemnation because the choices are wrong. What we're condemned to is a choice that's inaccurate. It's not true that my thoughts are reality and truth. Reality and truth existed well before I started thinking. And as a matter of fact, well before humans started thinking. So it must have something to it that exceeds thinking, and it must be who we are of rather than what we think we are. And if that's true and accurate, let's not even say true, because I think accuracy is a little easier for us because it allows for inaccuracy. But if it's accurate enough to consider, it would suggest that our ability to know more than we think would be easier than constantly thinking we don't know what we think. And that has been hamstringing, I would say, science and all of the exploration, mental exploration of humans, as long as we have been making believe that we need to know the details before we know something, rather than admit we know it. We just don't think we know it because we've been so bent on thinking reason is our source, reason is our God, reason is our end, rather than saying that good reason, we always have good reason for what we're doing, even when the good reason is sick. It always adds up. If we're thinking sick thoughts, we're going to act in sick ways. That's the perfect reason. People always say, well, there's a reason for everything. Of course there is. We wouldn't do anything if we had no reason. So talking about it, my experience is when I started talking about it broader, I got a lot of blank faces. I got a lot of people saying, what? Excuse me? I really need to go home and think about that. I need to take a nap. But it also opened.
I follow the logic and the clarity and everything about it is crystal clear to me. But the feedback loop starts in my brain.
Yes.
Regardless, it does sometimes.
Well, So another thing that I think helps is begin to see that if an absolute nature is responsible for everything, then we are responsible not because we take responsibility, but because we are responsible. If we exist, we're responsible, period. It's not a debatable. It's like being absolute, having an absolute knowing source. We are responsible by nature, period. So we can think irresponsibly and we can act irresponsibly and we can feel things as a consequence of that irresponsibility. But that doesn't make us irresponsible any more than when we think our thoughts are true and real, do we become those thoughts? We just think we do. Yeah. So in starting to see that, Gabe, in my experience, I started saying, whatever it is that's going on, I'm doing it, rather than thinking of it as something happening to me that, if I listen to the story I was telling, the stories always seemed to have this conjuring going on that was happening to me, which was the essence of most of them. They're really hard to let go of. I've done it my whole life. What else is there to do? Those are all addictive conversations. It's exactly what I said with drinking. Well, I've done it what am I going to do? What do you mean don't drink? As far as I knew, everybody drank. That was the whole point of life, was to drink and have fun and party and, get high and all that. Obviously, getting high suggested I felt pretty low most of the time. But it's that same conversation going on in my head with these other things. And this is so subtle because it's so primal, because it is the source. Thinking is the source of what distinguishes us as a species. And for us to have misused it so long to make believe that what's common amongst us is unnatural. And you hear people say, oh, it's just human nature to kill each other. That is not true. That is not true at all. It has become common because we have been sick in our thinking so long that we've taken for granted that this isn't something we can undo, because we even to think of it that way commits me to making sure that I see it in others to confirm the thinking I'm doing is right. The only thinking I want to see in others that's right is what's wrong, ever. because I'm fighting for proof. I'm fighting for votes. I'm fighting for people to see who I think I am. And I want to make sure they're thinking that I am who I think I am and that they're thinking the thoughts about me. And if not, I'm at odds with them and they're at odds with me. So shallow, so infantile, adolescent. And yet, I'm 67, struggling with the issues. Apparently that hasn't been enough time to come to terms with it. And it's actually a speck of time in the scope of time. But my sense is the less we talk about it in a broader sense and think of it in the broadest sense, meaning everyone's already intact, we're just dysfunctioning on the basis of our thinking. It's that simple. It is no more complicated than that. To begin thinking that way, it starts to actually put things in a perspective I would say is accurate and gives my sense of what's happening a chance to feel that I'm absolutely a part of it all. I'm not apart from any of it. And I'm not unable in any way unless I'm disabling the things I'm actually thinking in relation to those things. I'm already fully functioning. And if that function is that, if I'm dysfunctioning and I'm affecting everything dysfunctionally, certainly if I start functioning on a basis that's functional, I affect everything functionally. And if function is normal, it should become easy for everybody to grasp rather than the difficulty we've spent for eons trying to maintain and manage something that doesn't even exist other than our own thinking about it. This egoistic thing that we talk about.
No, thank you, Jack. This is exactly the medicine I need. My daily dose.
Yeah. And, the big book is an amazing book because if it's read from the point of view of our discussion, which I started doing early because I realized very early in my sobriety that I had had a problem my whole life. I didn't see it as something that started when I drank. I saw my drinking as something that was trying to put out the fire of the thinking I'd been doing. I'd always struggled with it from the time I can remember being 3 and 4 years old when I defied my mother at every point, and my father, who I loved dearly and didn't seem to know better than to do exactly the wrong thing to keep their attention. They had other things to do, surprisingly, than pay attention to me. And I hurt over that. I thought I hated them over their attention being paid to each other and other things. It bothered me. So at 3, that might make sense. I don't know. But it certainly doesn't make sense at 33, 23, 33, 43, 53, 63. It starts to lose its luster. And so if the intact nature of my existence is all of our intact nature, and it's not because I say it, it's because it is, I'm not leading this parade. I'm just talking about it. If that essence is our essence, that is everyone's essence, and it's everything's essence on top of it. Interestingly, isn't it interesting that humans struggle for perfection and yet inanimate objects operate perfectly all day long and always have? They're not at odds with what they're doing. They're doing what they're doing. They're not upset over it. They're not crying. They're not self-pitiful. They're not demoralized. They're just simply doing what they're doing. And we think we're superior to them because we can think, and we've used the same thing that gives us the impression we're superior to undermine our whole capacity to function in any meaningful and useful way on the broadest scale. I'm not saying that we don't. I'm saying that we aren't doing it sufficiently to eliminate the catastrophic consequences that we're creating for other humans and our environment. And I'm not suggesting we're responsible for everything wrong in the environment, but to the degree we've done anything that we're responsible for, we're certainly responsible for that without trying to debate what that might be. We seem to want to get in the weeds to figure out where it ends. And if we can't figure out where it is in the weeds that we started and finished, then we can't do anything about it. That's just another excuse to avoid it and deny it and pretend like we have nothing to do with it. How convenient reason can be used to completely avoid what's actually happening. And while the whole time it's happening as it's happening, regardless of what we think, getting back to the original point, Anthony. So if things are happening as they're happening and I'm not aligning myself, the only thing suffer is my thinking. What's happening isn't suffering. And yet the consequences of my thinking may cause problems for it too. by altering its natural path and its natural state.
It almost seems like it's trying to tell somebody with OCD that the stove's really turned off and you don't need to go check it. Even though that's not going to, it seems so simple of an answer. It's off, but they're not going to believe that.
Is that OCD Orange County dysmorphia?
I told you I have CDO. It's just like OCD, but all the letters are in alphabetical order as they should be.
Those things that we have described as diagnosis are accurate assessments of this dysfunctional consequence that we're creating. Think about obsessive compulsive disorder. What is that? Obsessively thinking about things that we become compulsively active doing.
Yeah.
Right?
At some point, it's a good idea to turn the stove off, right? But at some point, it's not good to check it every hour and have to leave and come back home to check it. So there's that fine line there.
Well, and if ADD, if we're paying attention constantly to what's not happening, trying to substantiate in the world that we only see in the world what we're thinking is there because our thinking is not right. We're looking for everything wrong in the world. We're going to see the world is wrong when it isn't. And we're going to see the people in it that are wrong who aren't. And if we're paying all the attention to that, how much attention do I have left to pay attention to what's actually happening? Why wouldn't I have attention deficit disorder? You know, I have a friend of mine who invented the first laptop at 21 years old. He put them on army jeeps with satellites.
Wow.
This is back in the 70s. And in school, they diagnosed him with ADD. And I said, were you interested in what they were teaching? He said, no. And I said, well, that isn't attention deficit disorder. That's just a lack of interest.
Whatever happened to that Gates guy?
Well, this isn't Bill, but the point is that if we're interested in something, there seems to be no lack of attention we'll pay to it. But if we're doing something that has no interest, self-interest is only interested in the self, and there's no self, how much interest could we possibly pay to ever substantiate it if there's nothing there other than the interest we keep paying? We're paying interest as a dividend when there's no principal, literally. Just like making an investment and paying our self-interest on an investment that we never made.
So when Gabe said he was struggling with, and I appreciate your honesty, Gabe, I really like that because I can relate to what you're saying. But when he was saying he wants to just torch it, he's finally got it all back together. And that's that famous quote in the book, you know, that they want to destroy it. What's the payoff? Why would somebody want to destroy something?
It's suicide because it's a final admission that we're trying to give credit where credit's undue. So we want to make believe there's something to burn down and kill, when in fact, there's nothing there at all that ever had any life other than the thoughts we had. It's a desperate gasp. You know, suicide is the last act of self-control. Last desperate act of proving you're in control. What are you in control of? Nothing. That's what the insanity is. That's what drives people out of their minds, literally. There's nothing there, and we're thinking it's everything, and it's pretty unfulfilling to think that all the time. And Gabe, I mean, you can speak to it, but my sense is that sense of burning it down is as though there's a forest to burn. And something, think of earth, you know, earth, air, and fire. Those are three of the basic elements in the world. You're thinking of it as something to actually burn, when in fact what's burning is this repetition that just goes on and on and on and on and on and on. It's only an illusion that there's a forest to even burn down or some structure.
I like how you had said a while ago too, Jack, where that you don't go to an AA meeting to hear how great everybody is and just how successful and how you want to hear the struggle a little bit, right? You want to hear what's really going on.
I don't know. I don't remember that, but I imagine when we're honest that it has a greater impact, regardless of what the circumstances are and how good or bad they might look, compared to fluffing, you know, just making things look better and all. You know, we're also sick and tired of ourselves doing that. I can tell you that the idea of being sick and tired isn't quite right, because we must not be tired to continue to be so sick. So it's like we seem to have plenty of energy to continue while we claim to be sick and tired, but we're sick undoubtedly collectively, but I would say that we're not quite tired yet. Burning it down also gives the impression there's something else there that needs burning, rather than see the burning nature of our own self-loathing for continuing to do the thing we've refused to stop. Is really, I mean, again, I had a panic attack. I thought I was dying. I literally had no idea what was happening at first. And it all came from one thought. I was writing about the ego. I was probably 5 pages into it. And I said, I am defining the thing that doesn't exist. And I thought, there isn't any, what am I doing? I'm creating a context for it of something that's insane. It's like writing a travel log or a Yelp review on an oasis in the middle of the Sahara so people can find the mirage. That would be insane. You'd be leading people to their death.
I like when Gabe also said, shake the Etch-a-Sketch, because I just couldn't shake the Etch-a-Sketch.
I love that. Especially for, I don't know, the Etch-a-Sketch even still exists, but it's.
Yeah, I think
it does.
Yeah. It's probably on the phone now. It's probably
go ahead. No, for me, the burning down, I think, is I grew up in a very chaotic family situation with a practicing alcoholic and a codependent. And so you never knew when you would come home, was there a fight? Was there broken glass? They're in the back talking to each other for hours on end, no dinner served. It's just like, it's just, chaos and uncertainty. And when everything is certain and comfortable and as it should be, that's unnerving. A little bit. So you want to have some chaos so that you feel at home. So that's kind of where.
Well, and the other thing about the comfort is that it can start anytime.
Any second.
The quieter it is, the longer that it's coming in those instances. For the most part, it's pretty predictable. It's interesting that we have great assurance that we know it's coming and don't notice how assured we are, and use that as a source of confidence in just our own awareness, because it's actually something that's happening or may happen, right? And yet at the same time, how long ago was that, Gabe?
Oh, yeah. It's 40 years ago, 50 years ago.
Yeah. So all that's remained is the thinking about it.
Wow.
And the thinking about it can't be accurate, because the accuracy of the moment right now includes everything happening everywhere. And there's a good chance you're not thinking about all that. You're thinking only about the things that you've attached to, that gave you whatever it is that you continue to lurk in, that lurk in your thoughts and haunt you. And those few things clearly aren't everything that happened back then, but are the ones you use to refer to then as though it's then and not now, instead of really noticing that the only place it ever is happening anymore is here. And we are actually the perpetrators of the actual crime that we thought occurred then in the present. We're creating the present traumatic stress that is intolerable. We know it's intolerable. We know that it's insufferable. We know that it's ridiculous and insane.
But it's
Jenna.
It's the familiarity.
But isn't it interesting how comfortable we get with sickness and how uncomfortable we get in health? Think of that. We're so used to the sickness and the disease that we've actually called it comfort. And it's just like saying we love doing the thing that's killing us. It's very twisted, versus beginning to notice, Gabe, when you have that awareness and it's quiet, a natural absolute state of being does not make any noise and it does not move. It is pure silence and pure calm, right? That would be an absolute state of being. It isn't turbulated. It isn't in conflict because it doesn't have bits and pieces to conflict. It's just a state of absolute knowing. And it's like a perfect lens looking into the universe, where you can see so much more as a result of that lens, that the clarity of the subtle things that we're doing become bigger, rather than the idea that because they're subtle, they're not happening. It's actually a growth in awareness that you're beginning to witness those things in ways that still seem impossible, because they're always going to be impossible, because they're only thoughts about things that aren't happening. It's always going to be that way.
But looking through the telescope is going to shatter my what I think of myself, Jack, and that's too scary to look good.
Exactly. So you see where the burning is.
Yeah, I see it. I told you, like I said, the logic and the clarity, it's all there. But my God, I don't want to look through that telescope.
Well, but you're also talking about looking at insanity being insane, and to look at it as sane would be insane.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a clarity in that, Gabe. You're talking about it. You've exposed yourself to it. And I mean, I remember when we first started talking, the conversation was not this conversation, certainly.
No, yeah, correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Gabe, when you said that you are looking through the telescope, who is looking?
Me.
In who is
Oh,
you?
my ego, my thoughts.
So going back to what Jack was saying, if the ego is false and fictitious, so you are looking through the telescopes with a fictitious entity, and that scares you.
Yes.
Why?
Yeah, because it'll shatter in an instant what I believe of myself or what I think of myself.
Even the word shatter is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it'll explode.
As though it's a glass chalice that is sitting on the shelf and could be at risk, when in fact it's a thought. It's literally as vaporous as anything. And Santiago, you're making the point very clearly that it isn't what we see, but what we think we see, we struggle with, because our awareness of what's there doesn't need a telescope, because we're already in touch with the absolute nature of the entire universe and whatever might be beyond that. We're already part of that. We're already intimately a part of that knowing. So the seeing now becomes something very different than is done by eyes through lenses that can either be microscopic or telescopic. But a sense of knowing that is in fact the ultimate form of knowing, that doesn't understand and it doesn't reason because it doesn't think. It knows. What would it think about if it knows everything? What would it have to think about? What reason would there be for it to be reasonable? It already knows everything. It's already intact. It isn't something that's divisible.
Is this, with this being football season, is this a good analogy where you're really playing a game of football against another team, but the other team is really yourself? And so every time you try to beat down that other team, you're really kind of beating down yourself, and there's really not going to be a winner in the game.
Well, but the other team's getting better too at being beaten down, which means they're either going to get better or just succumb and give up.
Yeah.
So most teams that unexpected, the beauty of sports is that the unexpected team, that's where the excitement is that you never know who's going to win.
Yeah.
Teams do things unexpectedly based on the failures, based on the losses, based on the history that seem to overcome it, when in fact all they're doing is beginning to realize a greater potential as a result of the experience. It's actually a learning curve. And that's really, I would say, what we're doing in our own thinking, is to start to see that if what we're doing is wrong, it's always going to be wrong. So when we begin to understand that and stop thinking that we can continue doing the wrong thing and the job is to feel better about it, we stop treating the symptom. We start seeing that it's the cause that's the problem. It's not the effect. It's not what we're witnessing in terms of our feeling. It's actually the cause. Morning, Everett.
Good morning, everybody. Great to see
Everett's
everyone.
back. Okay, let's start
That's
the meeting
right.
all over again, Jack.
It is a new moment none of us have ever experienced right now. So we're starting. And that's the interesting thing about addiction. We try to stop it when in fact we're always starting it. The one thing we're always doing is restarting it. That's the problem. It's the same with the thinking. It's not about stopping. Stopping is an after effect. It's as though it's some other place, some other time. And when we're trying to stop it, it's already stopped. It's the restarting of it that we struggle with. It's the idea that we're not doing it, that we keep doing it and thinking it's happening to us, because certainly it couldn't be happening by us.
Now, is it possible there is really no starting and restarting? It's all the same?
I would
It's a
say
good-
everything's possible, but that which is impossible. So if the moment is always new, then what we must be doing in the moment is always new.
I do find what Anthony just said really interesting, and also in terms
It's so
with,
good to have you back in this meeting. I've been missing you.
because I feel like when I concentrate on what I shouldn't be doing, I have a hard time not doing it. If not, I end up doing it, versus thinking about what I should be doing. For instance, not thinking about not drinking, thinking about more towards positive aspects of my life that I need to be focusing more on.
But what's interesting about that, Everett, is when you're thinking about what you shouldn't be doing, you're obviously overlooking what you're doing, which means the idea of doing anything about what you're doing seems impossible, because you're constantly stuck between what you should or shouldn't be doing. And should or shouldn't has nothing to do with what's happening, because what's happening is that it's happening is a lot more important than what should be happening. What is a question? That is a statement. And as you begin to notice we're doing what we're doing all the time, whenever we're doing what we're doing, it stabilizes us to begin to even imagine what we could be doing, which would be at some other time and place based on certainty rather than a disturbing effect caused by uncertainty about what I should be doing, when in fact what I am doing is what I'm doing. I'm always doing what I'm doing while I'm thinking what I should be doing. It's again another thing about thinking about what's not happening and wondering why we feel distressed. The distress is actually the reason that it creates addictions, is because we're perpetually trying to do what we're not doing when we're doing what we're doing the whole time. So it just creates an impossible conflict. Yet the conflict is certainly possible, but the resolution of that conflict is impossible as long as we maintain that same line of thinking. We're always doing what we're doing. And we're talking here about the discomfort, Gabe, is starting to notice we're always in the present and we've never been unknowing about what we're doing. This idea that we think we don't know is just a thinking a thing. It's not a reality thing. We've always known, and we've been sick about it the whole time. And it starts to actually show that the anxiety and stress is an accurate assessment of something we're doing that's anxious prone and stressful. That's it. Immediate. It doesn't eventually happen when we finally pay attention to it. We seem to need it to get so bad before we finally pay attention, because we become numb to all those other incremental moments, making believe it's not happening. While we think we'll figure it out, we're trying to escape the reality that we're in. And there's no escape from reality, or it wouldn't be real. If there were escape from it, it would be unreal at that point of escape. That would mean all of reality had no reality. There would be no truth, and we would not be struggling with this, because insanity would be our nature and we'd be thrilled to be insane. And I haven't found that to be the case with people in my own little narrow world.
But you don't know when you're insane.
Of course you do.
How?
You're disturbed. You're conflicted. You're in anguish. You're in turmoil. You're at odds. You're reactive. You're impulsive. You're compulsive. All those things are extensions, and they're immediate. You cannot have a cause without an immediate effect. If the cause is I should be doing something else, what am I saying? I should not be where I am. What is that? Insane. Do we not know we're doing that? Of course we know we're doing it. We keep repeating it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, pretending we're not doing it. That's pretend. That's pretending you're a fireman as a kid and wondering why the truck keeps passing your house and doesn't pick you up. You got the boots and the hat on. I'm a fireman. Why can't I go put out a fire? We're old enough to see this. Most of us. We make believe we don't know. That's a story we tell. That helps perpetuate the doing of the thing we think will somehow work, when it's an impossibility that it will ever work. It's a possibility to try, certainly, but trying ain't doing. Nothing's ever been done that's been tried, and everything that's been done has been done. So if you try something possible, it's no longer trying, because it's done. You never have to go back to trying again. You just do it. Why? Because reality doesn't change. Principles can be applied all the time in the exact same way for everyone, everywhere. Unprincipled things appear to be applied in every different way that we can imagine. Like Tolstoy said in the beginning of Anna Karenina, Every happy family is happy in its own way. Every unhappy family is unhappy in their own way. Every happy family is happy in the same way. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. Same for us. We create the distinctions that we fight for to claim we're independent, so we can continue to claim the suffering is something unique to us, so we can make believe that continuing to do it makes sense when it's insane. And it drives us nuts. We talk about it. We don't need to be driven there to be nuts. We know, or we would not struggle. Why does everyone want to feel better and nobody ever says, what I really need is to feel worse? I feel so good all the time. I just need some comparison.
Well, that's kind of what Gabe was saying when he started this, is that everything's going great, but he's feeling like he needs to feel a little worse because he wants to tear it down.
It's the comfort. It's like, that first sip of vodka, just everything is okay, because I'm about to muck it up.
So suicide would be comfortable to sick thinking because it's a solution to sick thoughts.
Yeah.
The comfort to sick thoughts is destruction. So to think we're comfortable while we're destroying things is to continue to maintain the fact that we don't know any better, because we're ignoring, we're denying, we've gone numb. We've used denial as a psychic anesthesia to make believe the best thing we can do is pretend we're not doing what we're doing, not feeling what we're feeling, so that we become sentient beings who are no longer sentient and sensitive. We become insensitive, inconsiderate. It's insanity. Fantasy has become reality. And it's never going to be reality. That's what's insane about it.
Yes,
So
I know I'm insane. Yes.
we don't have to think. Well, I wouldn't say you're insane, but I would say the thoughts we have that are still seemingly running us are insane because we allow ourselves to think about them as something independent from us happening to us. We're still thinking of them in ways that it seems so profound that we could create such a mess in the name of growing up. And my sense is the biggest thing we're afraid of is embarrassment.
Yeah, that's a good one.
An ass is in that word. And we don't want to expose I heard somebody once say, you can't save your face and cover your ass at the same time.
I think isn't it the neutrality of everything being okay? Like once I decided that it was going to be okay, now I have to say it like 1,000 times a day. What if it's okay to be okay? Because I'm not used to the neutrality of everything being okay.
Well, but it also gives you the clarity that if you're suffocating, it's probably not okay. And if you're starving, it's probably not okay. It starts to give you the clarity that not being okay is okay. And not being good is good, because they're basically the same thing. They're not as different as we'd like to make them when we think they're specific. When I think all I'm going to be is happy, I'm basically taking on everything that could perhaps not please me and make believe I'm all of a sudden pleased by it all. That's not going to make me happy within a very short period of time.
Guilty if you're not pleased by everything, because then everything's not okay.
But in essence, okay and not okay are the same thing. We don't tend to want to have everything as it is, or we'd never make choices to do anything. We've just been condemned so long to the thinking is our source, that we've been suffering and struggling and never getting what we really thought we wanted anyhow. But ultimately, the getting of what we want is starting to see that when I stop trying to only get the things I think I want, I start getting a lot more than I could have ever imagined, because there is a lot more than I can imagine when all I'm imagining is what I think there is. Normally, what we struggle with other people is not who they are and what they represent, but what we think about them. That's the struggle. It's not the world that I'm struggling with. It's what I think of the world. When I'm thinking impossible thoughts, the world seems impossible and life seems impossible. And neither of those are true.
And that's really how you started the whole thing. That's how you started your whole presentation, which is what Everett missed. But
it might be worth. It might be where you can listen to it.
Shadow.
So you can go back to the introduction because I hammered down a couple points I think I misspoke to last week. But the essence of this is that in a absolute state of being, there is no neutrality because there is no fight. None of the things that we think of in relative subjective terms, human terms, even apply there. But if that's our essence, then the things we're making out of the things we do in a human way are undermined in our capacity to express ourselves in the most abundant way, because we're constantly only thinking of them in relation to what we're thinking rather than in relation to all that they already are. And that, I would say, Jan, is the beginning of seeing that neutrality is starting to recognize that whenever I'm in a fight, and that would be another point to notice, Everett, when you're struggling and don't think you're thinking what you're thinking, you're always in a struggle. There's a fight going on. You can feel it. You're irritated. You're restless. You're discontent, as the book says. But it goes more than that. You're depressed. You're anxious. You're stressed. You're compulsed. You have a sense of impulsion. Got to do something. Got to stay busy. Got to stay busy. Got to stay busy. There's a compulsion attached to it. All those things are evidence that we're running from something. Doesn't mean we can't do those things, because certainly we all know pretty well, probably better than most, that we can do all those things very well. While being well at doing those things isn't good for us because it's sick, it's twisted. What we think is good in that regard is actually bad, and what we think is bad is actually good, because it's all been reversed. We've had our brain on backward, effectively.
What you said about when you have a problem with someone, excuse me if I misquote you, but that it's what you think of them.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that I find really interesting is every blue moon, I'll bump into somebody who has said nothing to me at all, and I have a problem with them. And, you know what I mean? Like a real problem. Like, and I say to myself in real time, Everett, that's really, who knows? Maybe they're a nice person.
Yeah.
Maybe they're, you know, and I have this thing in me that I'm like, no. And then
Santiago
I write it,
said the same thing. Santiago is mentioning the exact same thing. People will just walk by and he just doesn't even like them for some reason. That's how we're all similar.
And then also as also in like serving people. And then the next thing I know, like I engage with them and they're like, they say they turn out to be extremely beautiful people. I mean, sometimes even to the point like, you know, you really have a beautiful smile. And then I'm saying to myself, oh, I'm such a horrible human being that I'm thinking, you know, these thoughts that I'm not saying this happens all the time, but it's happened before. But that I was just sharing this in support of what you said, Jack.
But you see how the thinking immediately translates as you being a horrible human being. Even in that thinking, we think we're engulfed in the flames of the thinking when in fact we're constantly taunting the thinking to do what it can't do. We're constantly choosing that for it to happen. It isn't an accident. It's not a coincidence. We aren't unconscious of it. If we're conscious of the unconscious, we're aware there's an unconscious, and that must be a place where we hide things that I don't. What I realize is that's where I put everything I don't want to be responsible for. So what does that mean? It seems to happen to me, catches me off guard. What does that mean? I'm normally on guard. Why?
Getting away with it.
Constantly defensive, constantly
getting
defensive.
away with it.
But interestingly, how sure we are about what's wrong with others while we're struggling with self-doubt. We're trying to get them to take the weight of what we don't want to bear. We're trying to give it away rather than have it and admit it. And Janet, part of the being okay is saying, if I'm thinking sick thoughts, I'm thinking sick thoughts. There is nothing wrong with that if it's what I'm doing. Nothing wrong with, if I start thinking it's not what I should be doing, I'm creating the resistance that becomes depressing and causes the persistence because I'm not simply willing to say, wow. And listen, I tell you this in all sincerity, not to just make this point. I have sick ideas about people all the time.
No.
Not all the time. But
Do you have any about me?
Of course, because I love you.
Oh, creepy.
Exactly, though. We say that we do those things in the name of love. I love doing it. I hate letting go. I hate learning. I hate this. The fact is, we grow in our awareness of our absolute natural state of love that is completely fulfilling and we are fulfilled by right now. And we cause an experience in our body by what we think and haven't quite noticed how dramatic that experience can be. It's like seeing a horror film and pretending that we shouldn't jump in our seat or feel a little queasy about what's going on.
So I had an interesting experience yesterday. A gal that I've known for a long time, and she's got like over 30 years of sobriety, and she's a real go-getter. Anthony knows her, but I haven't talked to her in like 7 years, called. And she launched into just a litany of complaints about the barn where her horses and he works and all this stuff. And at first I wanted to like reel her in and bring her back into the love and
Yeah.
to defend against it. And it was really uncomfortable. And then I settled in and just thought that she needed an audience. It was something that she really wanted. And that all I could look at her is with love. And it was like 3 hours. And I'm not kidding. It was crazy. But what I said to her at the very, very end, because I couldn't like agree with her on any level on the things. And I guess she didn't need it because, I mean, you kind of want a co-conspirator, like when she says this happened. And then I would go, oh yeah, that's fucked up. I wasn't saying that. I wasn't saying anything.
Right.
And I just said, all I said was, I go, you shouldn't, as you know, with your knowledge or whatever, something about like, you shouldn't even have to have those stories. And you know what? She totally, and then I thought, fuck, I can't believe I said that because it might be insulting. And she totally got it. And she was happy. She goes, no, you're right. I shouldn't at this point, because the specifics of the agony or the angst isn't the story. You know, we don't need the specifics about the girl at the barn or her boss or this or that. It's the dysfunctionality of it. And she's principled. But it was interesting because once I let go of the angst, all I could see was love. And it was uplifting, even though she was angsty. And in the end, I think it all came together. And I can't think that I've ever had that happen before without me trying to curb it or make it anything other than what it was. It was, for me, just pure love. And it was amazing.
That's exactly the application I'm talking about, Jana. It's starting to notice the impact we have is dramatic. And when we do the things we think are trying to fix it, we're actually breaking things rather than just witness it.
Right.
And do you know why the end was so fulfilling?
Why? Because we were in love.
Because the beginning was being dealt with. You were simply allowing her to do what she was doing and putting aside, noticing what you were thinking, but also saying, you know what? She may just need a little exhaust time here. She may need a little steam released from the kettle. Yeah, and to do that for somebody, by the way, is extremely rare. And that's largely what psychotherapy is. A chance to say things without somebody telling you shouldn't be thinking that or saying that.
Right.
It's just a chance to get it out.
Yeah. And oftentimes, depending on how you respond to that, Janice, the next you know, the contagion then shifts onto you. And then you end up having an issue with, or she's like, how come you can't just understand me? How come you can't just hear me out? You know, and then
in the hearing, eventually those stories will dissipate.
Oh yeah, no, they are. They're going to, because they didn't take as much form as if I had participated or been a co-conspirator. But It was an angry thing, or I wasn't judging her or thinking. I felt like little baby Jesus looking down on a loved one.
Yeah, well, because you're witnessing love. That was Jesus's whole message.
And it wasn't. It was uplifting, being able to be a witness to someone in a pure love way. I was uplifted.
Yes. Well, because it's natural. It's literally, there's no weight to it.
And then can you
Natural.
try to remember
So-
that same feeling, Jenna, when you're getting mad at me for sending a text you don't like a meme?
Like little.
Good. I told you in that light.
So let me make a point about that, Jana, because that's a beautiful example of exactly what we were talking about earlier about application. Starting to witness how quickly we seem to want to, and I do this all the time, I do it here a lot, to engage. My job here is to bat, sort of like we're playing, I'm playing, what do they call it? Badminton with two rackets. I'm just trying to keep it in the court. And the court of principled thinking is to begin to see what we're doing accurately, regardless of what we're doing. It doesn't have to be the right thing. To be honest doesn't mean saying only the right thing. It means saying honestly what we're thinking, even when it's wrong. And if I'm witnessing somebody and I got all sorts of ideas, like you were talking about initially, Everett, and I got all sorts of ideas of them, and I just allow them to speak and go, which I'm not great at. With my sponsees, I used to let them go about 20 minutes, and I'd say, okay, I'm back. And it would stop them from ranting in those stories. But the fact is, as we are able to speak the story, it starts to dissipate because there's nothing to them other than our own volition to maintain them. Now, think of that instance you had with her as something you do in your own interactive inner landscape with yourself. That's the conversation we have with a self that doesn't exist, which I would say is delusional to even think we're having a conversation. People say I was talking to myself. I'm like, how many of you are there? We talk to ourselves about these thoughts, and we have this debate internally that goes back and forth rather than say, wow, if I just sat and listened and didn't engage with that conversation, the chances are those thoughts would start to dissipate quickly. And awareness ultimately is not thinking about what's going on. It's simply seeing everything that's going on. And that seeing of it is the beginning of having a relationship to it where it will allow what it knows to become more obvious to us as something we know. Our relationship to nature is natural. Our relationship to each other is natural. The ideas we have and the thoughts we have is what disrupts it. It doesn't mean we can't have those things. So as you start having them and knowing you can have them and knowing the disruption is what you're thinking, the quicker you start thinking, the thinking actually has never had any impact on any of it except your commitment to the thinking that the result of what you were seeing was only what you thought. It's this idea that it's truth and reality that turns all of it into a major conflict. And it's internal, and it guides our external view. When I start looking at the world through a lens of my own thinking, all I see in that world is what I think is there, not what's actually there. Think of what would happen in science if scientists conceded that they already knew everything and were no longer looking for anything, but actually beginning to look at everything. Einstein said that he used to go into his office and return to the age of 9 so that he could see things clearly without everything he had learned about those things. Good morning, Jackie.
Oh, hi.
I noticed that, Moan. He said he would return to the 9-year-old when he was open to everything and he thought of things in that clear way rather than all the academic prowess he had actually struggled with. He wasn't a great academician, but he saw things clearly because he actually looked at them from the infant state rather than this highly developed state where there's typically arguments, and there's even people amongst physicists who are dealing with effectively everything that hate each other because they don't think the same way, or they have ideas they're in conflict over those things. I don't know if it's hate, but it creates a disintegration of something that's fully integrated. And my sense is nature's always been speaking to us because it's been who we are and what we are. It's natural. We just haven't been listening to anything than what we thought about it.
It's recently something happened to me during my day job that is pretty. One could look at it. Well, it's big, right? It has major effects on all aspects of my life. And I initially, when I hit like panic mode, I made a list of all the reasons why how negatively my life will be impacted. But then I took a breather or so, or, after I kind of got out of the victim state and the blame state, I took a step back and I said, I've been here before. And I was like, how many times in my life have I thought that my life was about to just absolutely implode? And then I thought about the really, really big ones, like the end of my 23-year marriage, and when I was in like suicide mode with my addiction. And in both of those cases, I look back on them as blessings that people who really know me know that I find my alcoholism to be a gift, because it really keeps me in my lane, being a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I know my limitations. It shows me my limitations in life, which forces me to do, which is to be in service to others. And then the end of the 23-year marriage that I thought was so healthy and so wonderful, now in hindsight and through a lot of work, I see that it was quite unhealthy. And both of them were major blessings. And when I apply that logic to what's going on right now, I see that this is actually a huge opportunity. So going to what you said, Jack, about being able to, again, if I interpreted what you said correctly, to be able to step back and really and accept what's happening is happening, and to a certain degree, not attaching yourself to what is happening, but allow it to happen. That I choose to believe that things are going to end up to the better.
Well, here's the relief in that, is that things are happening as they're happening, regardless of what we're thinking. So the only thing we're doing is complicating what we're thinking about what's happening by talking about it with everybody else, who then gets more complicated by thinking about what they're thinking, and so on and so forth. What's happening has always been happening. And that point you made about feeling like you've been there before, what's interesting about the present, while it's always new, it's the only place we've ever been.
Yeah.
It's absolutely where we've always been. So the being there before is the clarity of saying, oh, this is the place I make choices as a human. This is the place where I start again. This is the place where I think again. This is the place where I begin. It isn't the place where I ever end, because if it's always beginning, there is no end to that. And so what does that mean? I have a choice to learn from what's happening and grow from what's happening, rather than condemn myself for the sake of thinking, since it's happening, I can't do anything about it. That's just a sick form of not willing to grow at all. And what is this? What is spiritual fitness but the ability to recognize the universe is expanding all the time? Why would it be odd for us to expand our thoughts in relation to that expanding universe? That would be normal, wouldn't it? That would be natural. That would be, our awareness immediately condemns us to all the worst case scenarios, because that's all we're thinking with is worst thoughts. And we're thinking they're true. We're thinking they're real. We think we're defending a self that exists. It doesn't.
What you make me think about right now is all the times, like meeting you the first time, where I felt like I was home. And I wonder if that is that same state of mind, like that sense of present, that just like when I said, when I said that, like, I've been here before.
Yes.
It's like when I heard you that first time at the Marina Center, I was like, I've been here. There was a feeling of comfort that was overwhelming. And at a time when I was really unstable, or let's just say more unstable than I am right now.
No. You were right the first time.
Thank everybody.
Listen, so interestingly, if the absolute is absolute, we cannot leave this place, and yet we're not condemned, because you cannot be condemned to love, and you cannot be condemned to everything. What would there? Condemnation is always some form of lack. And if we're condemned to everything infinitely, there is no condemnation in that. So even if we consider we could be condemned to be where we are, which is the only place we ever are, regardless of what we think, what are we condemned to? Everything. Love. Absolute nature that does not change. That is not condemnation, because there's no contempt in it. All of the contempt and the condemnation and the hate, all that stuff comes out of thought. It does not exist outside of thought any more than a lie exists outside of thought. The abundant nature of abundance is why all of a sudden, when you look in that direction, Everett, you start to see all the opportunity. Why? Because it's always opportunity. And what's interesting is we would make believe that when things don't go our way, because when we made a decision, that thought was so true. We know what permanence is. We know what reality is. So when we think our thoughts are true and real, we think the only thing that should ever happen is what we think should have happened will happen when we originally make a decision. That is a commitment to missing most everything except the one thing we think should happen in the name of scarcity, in the name of insanity, in the name of making believe that everything is possibly less than nothing. It is so loopy that we even use the term to describe somebody who's not thinking straight. It's just a circular version of reality, thinking of itself, serving itself. It becomes the master and slave at the same time. It's beating itself into a greater mastery of nothing at all. It is no wonder that we have taken nature and abused it in the way that we have to try to prove that we're in charge. There are many, many ways that everything we do could provide more abundance for everyone than live in ways that have almost consistently had humans on Earth starving through history. Plenty of food. We just don't seem to need to get it, able to get it to the mouths in need.
That's
Those
a
are not
really
accidents.
that's a really big problem that I had at the hotel. Paul knows about it, that the amount of food we throw out, garbage cans of food, and especially after banquets. So after banquets, that food that's been on the tables has to go right in the garbage afterwards.
Yeah.
And then, especially since I walk to work, you walk past all these people that are starving.
I want to head in a relatively new direction in this conversation because we're at a point where I think it's conducive, and I don't want to miss all the points, but I get that there's an enormous amount of waste because I was enormously wasteful in my own life when I lived under the impression that the best I could do was the worst I could do. So I tended never to have enough money. I tended to always be late in my bills. I tended to never think I had enough. I tended to always be scarce. Because I acted in that way. Well, if we do that socially, we're clearly going to act in that way on a global scale. And I think we've been doing pretty good at that. So here's a thought. I put in this last week's announcement, I don't know if anyone noticed it or read it, but the link to that near-death experience conversation that NPR did with Bruce Grayson, who's a university professor at University of Virginia, I believe.
Yeah.
And he has spent 50 years studying near-death experiences, right? So here's the parallel, and I think I mentioned it in the writing. It seems that, he said, I'm a scientist. I'm not prone to believe things that I can't prove, and there's no way to prove that what these people are experiencing actually happens. But I can tell you one thing, after 50 years worldwide, since the Romans, these near-death experiences have happened, and every person who have come out of them have been changed psychically, had a major change in their awareness of things greater than the things they thought existed before the experience.
That's because they had a huge medical bill that they got, and they were just flabbergasted over it.
Well, there wasn't a lot back in the Roman times. The medical bills were pretty cheap. It was just one chop and it was over. It just took off your leg. But the point is that he has a 50-year history of looking at this, and these near-death experiences have people come out with a psychic change spiritually, an awareness of something greater than themselves by far, so profound as to have almost every instance no one interested in coming back into their body. Yeah. No one is rushing to get back into their body. They all feel depressed when they know they're coming.
But do you remember what they said, Jack? It wasn't love. Remember, it was acceptance was the great feeling. No one said love out of all of those, because I watched it every time you mention it. And it says acceptance, just feeling accepted.
Yes. Well, being a part of everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, there was a knowing sense that they all had. Now, here's another point he makes that I think is really brilliant and insightful for our purposes. People said for a long time, he said, well, a lot of those people are on drugs. They were in surgeries. They were in this, that, and the other thing. They're, adrenaline is hype. They're hallucinating. He said, no, hallucinations have no long lasting effect any more than a dream tends to.
Mm-hmm.
He said, but these experiences change people for life. And one of the girls said she really missed her father, who used to be like a little aggravated. She said he's no longer aggravated.
Yeah.
He's just at ease. He just doesn't have that in him. So the parallel here is that Carl Jung, very brilliant psychologist, psychiatrist. I don't think he was a psychiatrist at that point. I think he was a psychologist, but I don't know his complete history. Stated that, I know his quote is in my thing and I don't remember it exactly, but he basically said that every once in a while, through history, alcoholics, people with drug addictions, people that were suffering, had these psychic changes, these spiritual awakenings that provided them the source to be free from whatever it was they were struggling with. Any of those compulsions, right? So that psychic change has been central to AA's success, our ability to have a spiritual experience of some sort, whether it be the immediate white light experience or what they call the garden variety, where it grows over time through association. But isn't it interesting that we need to kill ourselves or be near death to face that? Doesn't it suggest that we have been building a defense against who we actually are in the name of who we aren't, that we are so defensive over that it takes near-death experiences to finally witness the purity and the absolute awareness that we naturally have, that we talk about here? And it may seem elusive because it seems so hard to get to, because we've been thinking we're not there the whole time. We haven't even allowed ourselves to witness it's here now. And it's with us now. And it's always been here. And it's always been the source of our existence. And it can't be anything else ever, no matter what we think. We don't have to kill ourselves through addiction is a suicidal tendency. And the mental addiction is the source of those suicidal tendencies. We can die 20 years sooner than we would otherwise die from the anxiety we impose on our body and think that we have nothing to do with disease when we undermine every bodily system that we have and its ability to function healthy, to function with health rather than dis-ease because of the stress we impose on it and the inflammation that comes as a result of it. And all of the catastrophic consequences we have in our interrelations with other people and the decisions we make about how to live and what to do in that life we're living or in that experience of life that we're having. We do not need to kill ourselves, and we do not need to act compulsively to save ourselves, because the self we're trying to save has no basis whatsoever, and it has been thought of as true and real as long as history has been spoken. So much so as to think that self-indignation and righteousness is justifiable reason to kill other people and ourselves. And that's all it ever is. Humans as a species are the rare species that have created an environment where we could possibly cause our own extinction when it isn't happening naturally. It's happening as a byproduct of our unnatural thinking. Normally, when a lack of adaptation in any species begins to veer off and doesn't allow that species to grow and develop, exactly what you were talking about, Everett, seeing the opportunity and adjusting to that opportunity rather than shutting down and resisting the learning we're capable of and that we're always in the face of. To any degree that we're looking at something new, we're learning something about something. And if we're shut down all the time thinking all we should be doing is what we think we should be doing, then all we're getting are the limited expectations and literally causing a chronic disease in our system because of the anxiety and the stress, and undermining our ability to actually function. And our preoccupation becomes looking and looking and looking and looking for something rather than admitting we already have it. We're looking for the worst in us rather than expressing the best of us.
Can I ask you a question, Jack?
Another one?
Yeah.
That was
I've
your
never
first.
Of them until I take my last breath on this planet. But how do you, I don't want to say function, but I mean, like at the AA meetings here and the people that I interact with on Maui, there's a lot of military, and people feel really proud of the fact that they've protected us and you know, in the name of killing people. And it seems so far from my thought process. I mean, I always say blessings in my head and stuff, but it's a weird reality that has to be. I mean, there's a lot of pride. There's a lot of military. People have died to protect us, and I can't. Never rang true for me. We had my brother jump the border to Canada when it was happening, from Venice to Canada, but so I don't know. I'm just thinking, what are your thoughts on that?
I was attacked by a guy and stabbed. You know
Right.
that, right? If I had had anything to protect myself, I would have used it. I didn't, and I ran. I got away as quickly as I could. I don't think, given the history we've had, that it doesn't make sense to be warring. I think it makes perfect sense to be warring, given the history we've had and the history of thinking we do. I think it's an absolute perfect manifestation of the thinking we're doing that's conflicted. Is it necessary? I don't think so. Is it today probably necessary? I would suspect it probably is, because we've created this egomaniacal tendency where people are out to get us. So I would say it's probably worth protecting ourselves if we have any interest in survival. And at the same time, if within the context of the survival that we've been given and the freedom that we've been given, it's interesting that we claim that there's a price that has to be paid for freedom. That's like saying something's free at a store as long as you pay for it. There's a conflict in that, and it's inherent. I don't think it keeps us from beginning to speak to a potential we have to begin to operate on the basis of actuality rather than reactuality and reactionary ideas, which are all, as far as I'm concerned, reactive behaviors are all defensive behaviors. Because when we're creating the reactive problem in our own thinking, we're going to be prone to attack other people to resolve the problems we think we have with them, when it's our thinking creating those problems to begin with. And the United States, I love the freedom that we have, and I love our Constitution, and I love the ideals that we have. But we have been one of the greater provocateurs of military operations for the commercial benefits of any country the history of this world has ever known. We are masters at turning peace into a war somewhere, someplace, for the motivation of people who are not well intended, in terms of it doesn't seem to be that the kids of the people in the Senate and the Assembly and the Congress and the White House are going off to war and getting killed. It seems to be the other kids that don't seem to matter as much that take on that heroic effort and end up witnessing. You know, I have a nephew, my niece's husband was in Afghanistan and Iraq, and watch friends get blown up. You can't have those experiences and not be affected by it, because it doesn't make any sense that we do it to each other in the name of protecting ourselves when we're causing the threat that's causing the need to protect it. It's just a vicious cycle. And yet I expect at this point that it probably makes some sense. I mean, I applaud people who do that. I didn't want to have anything to do with that. I was actually upset in 1968 that I couldn't dodge the draft and get arrested for it, because it seemed that was the first war in our country that was actually looked at as questionable, where people said, what are we doing? And Vietnam today, Katie has a friend who was in the military and he's a writer and an actor who created a play, and he took it back to Vietnam and had officers from the Viet Cong witness the play, and they all cried together.
Oh, the guy that
Ken Burns did a documentary on the Vietnam War, and he interviewed one of the head Viet Cong captains, and he said, what does it feel like to beat one of the biggest empires on earth? And the guy said, the question obviously is coming from someone who's never experienced war, because anyone who's experienced knows that there are no winners in war. Here's the winner. not even willing to take credit for it, but concede that it's absolute insanity to participate in it.
Oh.
And that was Ken Burns.
Oh.
Jen, Jen, I really appreciate your question. That's something that I really struggle with it all the time. I consider myself to be I don't say this like, I don't think I'm saying this in an egotistic way, but I think that I'm a person who's full of love, and I love to share love. That said, I don't ever want to be put in the position of having to protect someone I love, and knowing that side of me is there, and also being someone who was I used to fight as a sport a lot, and knowing that side of me is there and I can't escape it, and I'm not ashamed of it, but I know it's there, and that martial side, that violent side. And I think what it is I try to navigate in a way that I don't allow myself or others to weaponize it. And clever people, politicians, or people that aren't really so clever, but they certainly know how to push certain buttons, including myself, or if I build a case to just, that's kind of that's a walk that I walk. And I have to apply the principles of AA. I have to, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, halt, and the things I've learned in this room about when I feel triggered by somebody, to start looking at myself. These are things that I use, but I really, really appreciate what you, that you brought this subject up, Jana.
Thank you, Everett. And I do like that you mentioned that it's something in ourselves, because it makes me so much kinder.
Well, and something not to miss here too, Jenna, is that when I think insane thoughts and nurse those thoughts, I am committing suicide and homicide in the actions I take by being caustic in my own thinking right now. I am a participant in that. I am not excluded from it because I'm sitting on the sidelines. It's like an economy. If you don't spend money, you affect the economy. If you spend money, you affect the economy. If you don't make money, you affect the economy. If you make money, you affect the economy. Economies are affected by everything everyone else does, regardless of what they do. So addiction is not some strange confluence of events. It's an absolute consequence of thinking that is a lie. We are repulsed by lies. So what do? Repulsive things as a result of those lies. And what has it done? Pitted country against country in the name of borders that were all man-made, based on calendars that were all human-made. These are all things we have done to justify what we do. It isn't to say we need to continue, but the chances are we will for some time. What's interesting about defensiveness is that the martial arts, most of the Asian martial arts, especially in Japan, as I understand it, Aikido being probably the most recent incarnation, not a mixed martial art, but a martial art in terms of its ultimate purpose, was to be so well capable of defending yourself that it prevented someone from becoming a murderer. Very different idea about defense and about, I would say that's wisdom. And we are. Go ahead.
Yeah, the name in itself, martial and art. It's the martial aspect of protecting yourself, and then the art of which is the philosopher and the philosophy. That's the move that Bruce Lee does, where he punches his hand. It's like a punch kind of. He puts this. You've seen it a trillion times as he takes
the one finger punch.
No, not that. No, it's before he starts. It's if he. Oh, I forget I'm on camera. It's like this. Here's my hand. He goes like this and like that. This is the martial, and this is a philosophy. The paper, the literature. That's awesome. What that means. Now, when he puts his hand and the paper goes over his fist, that shows control. And when he opens his hand, when he does that, that means that game's on, that he's taking off the gloves, so to speak.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So the other aspect of the martial arts is that they largely didn't include weapons. Though obviously the Japanese were great swordsmen, the samurais, etc., knives and swords and all that. But the basic martial arts, judo, karate, aikido, etc., are basically the ability to use someone else's momentum against them. And I think it's what you described, Jana, when you just sat with your friend, that rather than counter her and end up blocking what she was doing, just allow her to do it. And it dissipated and gave her a moment of relief. Because what
was the perfect candidate to have me not retort or become a co-conspirator, because there was no way she was going to let me anyway. I had to surrender. It was awesome. And then it's so stoked she did that, because I just had the most amazing experience of my life, because it was like I just stopped holding my breath. I exhaled, and then she it was perfect.
No. Jenny, you just said something really profound, because in all martial arts, it's based off chi, which is energy. It's the source energy. And you said that you didn't hold. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
You let.
Once I exhaled, it was just pure love. From that on, I was smiling like happy Buddha, looking at their beloved child or connection or sister or aunt or mother or, whatever. And it was fun. And I don't think I've ever experienced not that without, I don't feel like I was judging. I felt like
the difference here, Jana, is that you're thinking, and as a result, you're thinking that your experience was the experience you were having, and your feelings are aligned with that thinking.
But when it happened, Jack, now I've been crying a lot again.
Good. Well, listen, I cry at some of the silliest stuff.
What's wrong with crying?
I don't know, but I grew up thinking it wasn't appropriate for men. And what I found is that when I'm moved, I cry. I just find things are moving and it moves through me. It's the idea that I should be stiff is what rigor mortis is just after we die. The idea that I should be cool is what rigor mortis is just after we die. It's interesting that I would think those are goals in life when in fact I'm killing myself with the sick ideas of what I'm doing.
So we should rest in the warmth of our wrinkles?
Well, they're probably not going to wrinkle as much if we're not constantly furrowing our brow.
Oh, there is that.
But you're thinking of what you did with your friend, Jana, and then thinking of that as an applicable purpose to, as I said before, the inner dialogue that we have. I think Gabe is still here. Yeah. I used to constantly engage with the thoughts I had about the thoughts I had about the thoughts I had about the thoughts I had. That's what stimulates this obsessive thinking. I think I'm actually having a conversation with somebody when I'm not having a conversation with anybody but myself. And if myself is just an illusion of what I think, all I'm doing is thinking about thinking and thinking about thinking and thinking more about thinking. And what I really need to be doing is thinking more about my thinking. And I need to make my thinking better. And I'm constantly thinking who I am relies on that success of that thinking. When in fact, if I just start listening how prone I am to thinking about my thinking and just start noticing, I've always been observing it. I've always been the observer of it. And what if I just observe it? What happens then? And you'll see it will start to dissipate as quickly as you just don't instigate it.
I just am beaming on people like we're all in this together, and kind of feeling like I had texted you about that thing last week when I went with some kind of famous people to a vegan thing, and everyone was super opinionated, and we were being driven in a car, and there was people in there that knew stuff, and I never had to say anything, but I didn't think like they were right or they were wrong. I was proud of them for their enthusiasm for whatever. One had made a movie on athletes and veganism, but they were all verging on know-it-alls. But I just beamed on the whole fact that I was even there. And it was just the most lovely thing. I didn't, no one even knows on Maui that I'm a real estate broker or anything. Like if people say, what do you do? I'm like, oh, I wander around and, I cook a lot, whatever. But I don't feel like I have to defend or explain neither of those things. And I think that may be the neutrality of it, but I do feel a lot of love. And I know I'm responsible for I don't want to say responsible for my feelings all the time, but I can say, I'm up to something. You taught me that. I can say that. And it doesn't mean I'm necessarily bypassing it, but I don't have to take that map inside my head because I know exactly the fucking road it's going to take. I don't have to do that anymore. I can just let it go and kind of like happy Buddha on that.
You never had to do it. We create the environment to have it appear we have to do it so we can justify continuing to do it while we also seem to want to stop doing it and wonder why we can't.
But suddenly I didn't want to stop to follow. There were times I wanted to, for sure. I'm a mathematical person. I know every right, left turn in my brain to make me feel that wah and to become a victim. And I just only have to share it with myself sometimes. I mean, this isn't current, but I know what it can do. And I don't want to bypass it or block it. I want to smile upon it like I'm a little kid and say, good for you.
If you bypass it and you block it, you're just bypassing and blocking it. And you can't do it, but you can think you do. And that as you begin to concede it, you're going to see that you're probably doing some things you think you're not doing by thinking you're not doing them. And then the subconscious nature becomes more obvious. And the real issue that has been compelling us the whole time that we thought it was just the thoughts we were thinking about that were actually bothering us, but it's really the thoughts that we don't think we're thinking about that seems to be the thing that doesn't tend to get the attention because we don't think we're thinking about them. We think nothing's happening and we end up feeling better, but we're constantly having to come up with new ways to feel better because we don't want to face the sort of undercurrent of this other aspect of what we are doing that is obvious to us and yet we want to ignore.
You just give us permission to wallow, and I've been saying every hour, it's all good. It's okay.
Well, and the biggest thing is the willingness to be wrong. You can think you can block it. Go ahead and do it. As you start realizing it's something you can do, you'll start realizing it's something you can't do. You'll just see the balance in it. There's the neutrality. It's not that you can't do it. It's that you can and you can't. It's that it's impossible and it seems impossible. Within thinking, all of that is always true collectively all the time.
You're right. You are totally right.
So but here's the freedom is starting when you know you're on the verge of doing something wrong, start doing that thing instead of stopping. Because this isn't about stopping it. It's about starting it and seeing that if you can do it easily with freedom, you'll start it will not even occur to you to continue to do it because there won't be an inner conflict over it. You just say, why would I even do that?
And it
just doesn't make any sense. You lose interest in it. Exactly. The interest in it, to Anthony's point, is what's the payoff? The interest in it is constantly having it appear to be something happening to us so we can claim we're not doing it, so we can claim we have to continue doing it. Bingo. That's the insanity of addiction. But we're looking to be right about it rather than say it's wrong the whole time.
But I don't understand why people try to get attention from other people with their sorry fucking story. I mean, come on. That's not attractive. Everyone needs to stop whining.
It's attractive to people who are telling sorry stories.
Well, it's also though they've proven that dopamine is when you get pity from other people, it's a chemical reaction. You actually get stimulated.
We're drug abusers of our own chemical factory.
Yep.
Yeah.
So how much of your own self-worth? How much of your self-worth do you get from other people?
Me?
Anybody, like how much of your self-worth is determined from what other people think about you?
Almost zero.
Jeez.
Counting other people like once a month, and you guys on 3 Sundays of the month. It's not about that at all.
It's such an interesting question, Anthony. Because
welcome back.
Lately I've been thinking a lot about the fact of how it's not just self-worth from other people, but how all of our, or at least most of my problems are generated by by the constructs that the constructs that we've created and expectations, how we're supposed to behave in society, is where I find my greatest conflict. And when I start saying to myself, hey, what's all this about, man? This
Nothing.
about this
You want to know the
experience.
answer? Nothing.
Yeah, exactly. I just want to feel love. You know,
But
it's like
Everett,
how much money I make and all
it's
this
still
bullshit.
what you're thinking. When we keep using what everybody else does, it's what we're thinking about them that we're trying to put on them so we can avoid noticing it's what we're thinking about them we're struggling with. It has nothing to do with what everybody else is thinking. Until we think our thoughts are true and real, do we start thinking a lot about what everybody else is thinking and have such great assurance in what everybody else is doing and what society has me do and all this stuff. And there's no truth to that at all, except the justification we use to continue doing the sick shit we're doing. That's it. There's nothing there. There's nothing in culture that says any of us have to do anything ever.
Mhm.
There are things that may say it, but there's no enforcement wing running around telling you to do it.
But when we pop out of the womb, we're left to
Forget
assume
about
that
it.
we're
You're
supposed
a little
to.
further, you're a little away from that point. So to use your infancy as an excuse for your maturity would be a little lacking in judgment.
I think in our culture, you
point
didn't say in
is,
our culture,
Everett,
there are some cultures that do restrict what you can do, but in our culture,
Anthony, you can always get executed for deciding not to do what they say you should do. It's a choice. It doesn't matter who and where and what, it's a choice. And the fact is, cultures are basically the mental obsession in social circumstances that gives us the impression it's who we are, and that violating those things is worth death, the same way that when we violate our own reality and truth, we want to kill ourselves over it. It's the exact same thing happening at a cultural level. That's all that it is. We now here, sitting here, have no obligation to anyone anywhere to think anything. And I will prove to you by suggesting that if we've done all the things that almost killed us in some respect, clearly there was no enforcement ring to be doing the thing that's the best for us. If we were capable of threatening our own existence by these thoughts we have, there's clearly nobody trying to insist we don't do that, because there seems to be a lot of that going on that nobody seems to be regulating. This week, we had a 6-year-old shoot his teacher in Virginia.
Fuck.
We had a Mormon father whose wife asked for a divorce, kill their 6 kids and her and himself. She wanted a divorce. Apparently that's not allowed culturally. So think of that solution to dealing with something that's not acceptable within the Mormon culture.
Isn't it 5 kids?
Maybe. I thought there were 8 altogether, but.
Oh, maybe a different one. I just saw something else with 5 kids. The guy killed.
So this is the society we're in. This is our society. Those are our social ills. We are part of the makeup that allows that, to the degree that we maintain ideas that are not true and make believe they are. That's it. Health, when everybody began to realize that the earth was not at the center of the universe, it didn't take a long time before everybody realized that. Why? Because it was accurate. And you know how much struggling there was in astronomy and all that before that point was made? They had all kinds of loopy ideas about what the orbits were because we thought we were at the center of the world. And when we think our thinking is at the center of truth, again, we're thinking ourself is centered in that thinking, and who we are is only what we think. That's what self-centeredness is. Self-centeredness is a self-centered in thought. It's not who we are. It's not true. As a matter of fact, it undermines our entire ability to witness truth and reality because of a preoccupation with trying to create truth and reality, because our thinking isn't true and real. And it doesn't strip us of that awareness. It simply strips our functional capacity of functioning in a way that's healthy enough to be a witness to that actual truth and reality and express it naturally. A dam does not create the energy that it provides the chance for water running through generators to provide. It just is a dam. And we are channels like that dam. And if we're keeping all the doors shut, we're not going to allow that flow of potential energy to pass through us and that potential truth and reality. We're going to do everything we can to make it appear as though it's not true and real, while it has no impact on truth and reality and has an incredibly sick impact on our own human experience.
Love the metaphor.
The church knew that the scientists were correct.
What's that?
The church,
Our neutrality.
The
if
Turks
the
knew.
Vatican. You hear me?
Oh, yes, of course. I'm sorry. The church knew. Yes.
The church knew that the earth was not in the center of the universe. The problem was not other than power, because
Yes.
the power of the church was based on the Bible, and certain passages of the Bible have to be a reality, have to fit to that.
Yes.
So it's nothing but the struggle of power. And what we were talking before about war, it's also about power. And there's no morals in power.
The idea that who I am.
Okay, go ahead.
The idea that who I am is my thoughts is the idea that I have empowered reality and truth, and I am now at the seat of power.
You're the creator.
Yes. In that same way, Santiago. So it isn't what I enable them to do. They do because I fall prey to the exact same thinking they're doing and become a conspirator and an ally of that thinking by thinking who I am is what I think. I become defensive and protective over thoughts that aren't true, but I want to maintain my truth because my truth depends on, my life depends on my truth being maintained. So I fight everything and everyone in my interactive incapacity to interact. So I'm interreactive in my relations. And I would say we have thought we were at the center of the universe in our mind by making believe that self-centeredness is in fact our source. That's the empowerment. And I know you were continuing, but I didn't want to miss that point.
Santiago?
Did we lose him? Is he playing tennis?
I have nothing to add.
Oh.
But that's how the global situation ends up being a macro situation of the microcosmic thinking we do. We each do to any degree that we participate in that. We are contributing to it. We are active participants in it. And
so I have a question.
Yeah.
How we, say there's two realities, there's only love and fear. And if we really examine that, the truth is that there's only love. And then that would be that nobody can be right and nobody can be wrong. If we live in that and we just are neutral to everything and we know that everything's okay because we're all part of, the absolutes, we can access all that there is at any time and we're all a part of it. So is there anything better or worse?
Again, it's there is no fear in absolute love.
Right.
That's just a human condition that there seems to be love and fear. That's not, I would say, true because there's only love. And what we fear is thinking that only love isn't only love unless we do what we think it would demand of us, as though it is some brutal dictator insisting we behave according to its dictates. And what would love be but allow us to do whatever we do, if that were true? So love and fear, I know that's in the Course in Miracles, but I believe that's
no, but she gets here in the very end. In the very end, they say that's just an illusion of our human experience.
Exactly. So it's not true.
Only love. And so
Yes.
then if I boil it down to my principled day, whenever someone says something that doesn't immediately ring true with me, I just can't judge them anymore. I can't. There's no right.
You can. And there's the freedom. You're welcome to do everything wrong, because wrong, and you know what the difference between wrong and right is?
What?
Right always applies and will always work. And guess what? Wrong never will. Here's an absolute principle. Wrong never works. It's inapplicable. Though you can apply it, it will not apply because it has no place in reality. And
No,
principles
it's just like
always
it doesn't
add up.
even exist, right?
What's that?
The wrong does not exist. It's the same as fear.
Well, exactly. It's a choice to make believe it's right. We don't tend to choose wrong. We think it's right. There's the conflict. If I think 2 and 2 is 5 and keep applying it and wonder why I'm struggling in math, it's not a real secret to anyone looking at it clearly, but it would seem to be impossible for me doing that to maintain the idea that what I'm doing is right and at the same time suggest that what I'm doing is wrong.
Well, using love as an absolute state of being, I would give you that. Go ahead and fly your freak flag. Why would I even counter that or try to be right?
It doesn't matter why you might, because you still might, because there may be something in your thinking that still isn't correct, that you may find triggering you in directions that you can catch yourself off guard and realize if you're caught off guard, it's because you think you should be on guard.
There you go. Because I have to impress somebody with my knowledge, right?
The beauty, and this is something to Gabe's point earlier, the beauty of the piece is beginning to realize that we can muck it up really easily. And that may sound like a dreadful consequence, but the freedom of it is seeing that why would I want to do that if I have no obligation? Why would I want to do it? And the only reason I would ever want to do it is because I'm still managing thoughts that are sick. It's the only reason I want to do it. I want to make believe that somehow I'm going to make those thoughts true and real, because I can't stand the idea that I've been given everything because I want to get credit for it. The self I think I am wants credit for everything, which is why it thinks it's the creator of reality. And so what do? I'm waiting for credit all the time, looking for credit. Why do I need credit? Because I'm bankrupt. I need to borrow money. My thoughts have no basis, and I'm looking for something to justify myself when there's no justification for it. It doesn't mean I can't do that. The freedom comes in beginning to see it absolutely is something I can do, and that's what freedom means. And if love is love, love gave us that freedom to do what we do wrong, think we're not wrong, and kill ourselves over it in the name of learning how to function as humans. Function rather than dysfunction.
So freedom's just another name for
something we abuse.
It's for lack of lack. Freedom is lack of lack. 2 negatives make positives.
What's that? 2 negatives make a positive.
Yeah, freedom is lack of lack. There is no lack.
Yes.
But
the freedom also, I mean, get this point. The freedom also allows us to think wrong is right anytime. We are on the precipice of that cliff anytime we want to be. And it's
freedom
simply
is just another name for nothing left to lose.
You had to look that up, Anthony. Gosh.
Jana, it's simply a choice that we are free to make. And we have been making that choice freely while claiming to be condemned so we could ignore the freedom and claim the condemnation as our source.
And can be very tricky because, I thought when I have this, that day I will be free. When I have that, I will be free. But it's never like that. You always want more.
Yeah.
And if one day, then I want to be immortal. Then I want to be able to fly.
The flying thing.
Many times is unreasonable.
Don't get carried away there.
Well, consider that we are immortal in terms of an absolute source. If we're infinite in our essence, then that isn't. The thing about the present, my suspicion is there is no time in the present. You know how they say there is no time like the present? There is no time in the present, because if something's always new, it has nothing old, so there's no continuum for time to exist.
That's like your light speed analogy that blew my mind.
Time has no effect at light speed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So even within the realm of our universe, we have evidence of these things, and then think about our present state as being something other than it is, because it shouldn't be what it is when we're here, where we are with what we have. And if we're always where we are with what we have, then we always have everything. And the idea that we don't, Jana, is what triggers this whole concept of wrong versus right. If I don't think I already have what I have, then I'm choosing from despair over what I don't have, rather than choosing to operate in ways that are good for everybody. I think only about what I can get for myself, because I'm creating the thought in the self I think I am that's giving me the sense of condemnation that I shouldn't be where I am. How should I not be where I am when I'm always there? That's a pretty impossible thing to take on, just like it's impossible to make believe that my thoughts that are imagined become truth and reality.
Yet we're always changing at the same time.
No, we aren't.
No?
We aren't, but our thinking is. That's why we work so hard to keep it still. We know the permanence of reality because it's our nature, and we're trying to fixate on thinking to fix what constantly seems broken, because it's always changing, it's always new, it's always something else. What's interesting about change is that whatever it is now, it wasn't just then. If it's changing, what it is now, it's never been before, and what it is now, it's never been before. So what it was doesn't even exist. Because it's only in the present that it actually exists. And what is that infinitesimal point that can't be judged by time, because there's no room for time in the infinite?
Like with the email I sent you, everything stays different.
Yes. Yeah. It's exactly what he was talking about. He was taking apart the basic terms that we use and then flipping them at the other end. What was his name again?
Herbert Grönemeyer.
Yeah, it's a beautiful German poem.
This is a little off topic, but not. I was petting, this sounds so like elementary and mundane, but I was petting my dog who I adore, like we all adore our pets. And I was I was looking at his hair, and I thought of one strand or blade of hair, how much information and DNA and what goes into the oil, the amount of oil in that one strand of hair. I mean, how much technology is in that one strand of hair?
Well, the whole DNA structure.
Right. And then I'm looking at all of that hair. And then I'm thinking about the pores, and then I'm thinking about the skin, and then I'm thinking about the whole design of this creature. And this is just one creature. And then and then everything around us, including ourselves, is designed that way. It's so wild. And I was not.
I'll have what he's
interesting is
I'll have what he's drinking.
What's wild is that we've been thinking it's not. What's normal, like we think the universe is big. The universe is not big to itself. It's just the universe. It doesn't think of itself in terms that are bigger or smaller. It just is what it is. What's interesting, to Santiago's point, I think he just fell off, but this idea that we can't get enough of something comes from the idea that we're trying to fulfill reality with the idea that our thoughts are true and real. So we try to get things that confirm that we are the creators of reality. And why can't they be enough? Because they don't have any existence. They don't have any existence. So we keep trying and trying and trying and trying to get more and more and more and more, and more is never enough. So enough is never enough. When enough is never enough, words can't even obviously function at that level, because there's no basis to them. If enough is never enough, what is ever going to be enough if enough isn't enough? If the word itself isn't enough, clearly we're dealing with something that doesn't quite fill the thing. Now, the twist is, it's not that we can't get there. It's that we're there now. We already know. We know. We already are know-it-alls, by the way, Jana.
Yes, I do know that. And in my knowing, I'm telling you that's where the peace is. And if I just
Yes.
let yes,
It isn't, and it isn't yours, by the way. It's ours.
it is ours, and I have to stop the committee, but I have to tell you guys part 2 of my crazy story. So I talked to that gal for 3 hours. Called that I hadn't seen for 31 years, and she's a top psychotherapist at UCLA.
Oh,
And
wow.
she's the most lovely human you've ever met in your whole life. But I met her in 1987 when I came from Maui to Malibu, and I was managing Gladstone's, and she was a waitress there. But she just happened to randomly call, and I said, "Oh my God, my other girlfriend's calling in. I have to go. I haven't talked to her in 7 years, but I promised I'd be available." Anyway, she's showing up on Thursday. Think of all the free therapy I'm going to get.
Sounds like you already got it.
No, I'm so excited, so happy. And all I can think is that, you think happy thoughts and you live your life in acceptance. And these are the promises being fulfilled.
Keep in mind, when we have to live our life in acceptance, it's because we're not accepting things that we have to do that. So the opposite is, it's like the idea that I shouldn't be where I am is also saying I'm not where I am.
Well, the whole first year we were here, I felt completely not worthy.
Yeah.
It was immense. It went beyond every dream. But then when you go through my heritage seeking, every single person in my family has always been on the water and sea bears. And my grandfather was the first Commodore for Seattle Yacht Club. And my mom was an old surfer. And cumulatively, why wouldn't we all be worthy of what's the highest and best? But I struggled a lot.
Okay. That's a very frank admission.
Mm-hmm.
And I also hear you say, I don't do those things anymore. And we are prone to making believe, because we don't do it as badly as we've ever done, that we're not doing it at all. And it allows us to think there's nothing more to do, and that we're constantly striving to do the nothing more that we think there is, rather than start to see that, wow, this adventure may not end during our physical life form. And it may always be open to more. If we're dealing in something infinite, there can't be, until we concede that the infinite isn't limited and really get that, we're going to think in ways that are going to think, well, for instance, being grateful. A lot of people talk about being grateful and how important it is, and being forgiving. The reason we need to be grateful, or seem to, is because we're not grateful. The reason we need to feel good is because we're doing things that are bad. We're thinking things that are bad. It's the only reason we have that compelling nature. Why is it that we can be so chronically bad and think we always need to be good, and not notice, wow, I'm really doing a lot of bad and need to feel better all the time? What am I trying to feel better then? Something worse, obviously. So grateful, when you recognize that an infinite source is as full as you can possibly get.
Absolutely.
Gratefulness is actually expressing that fullness of greatness that we have. And when we do that, like you had witnessed, Jana, when we actually experience that and say, you know what, I'm going to let go of the thoughts I have in relation to this and just witness what's happening in a different way. And all of a sudden you have this grand view of what's happening in a way that's profound, and probably one of the great learning experiences you've had, at least this year. And because the awareness of knowledge becomes clear, crystal clear. And
there is the possibility that she doesn't get along with this girl very well, and so she gets in a big fight with her.
All I know is we were on for 30 seconds, and I go, push FaceTime, and she goes, no, I'm too old. I don't want to. I go, do it. And we looked at each other. We started bawling our eyes out, and my 6-year-old grandson was sitting in my lap, and she goes, oh, look at beautiful you. And I'm like, look at beautiful you. And then I go, I promised this gal this space. I got to go. And then this morning she texted me her ticket. She's coming on Thursday, and she'll be here for a week, and we're going to spend 2 days on the West Side. And I was just like, you know what? Just the beauty of not having seen someone or connecting with them for 31 years and knowing that there's acceptance. Well, that's probably therapist. She was literally a cocktail waitress when I knew her, but she was always such a good listener. I told her she needed to be a psychotherapist, and she made it happen, and she's doing it.
Part of this, Jana, is to see that the conflict is as valuable as the sense of no conflict.
You know what the conflict with her will be? She will be too accepting, and I will want to prove her wrong and fucking fuck it up somehow.
No,
And do
the
horrifying.
point is, it's just
Bingo.
giving us evidence of what we're doing. That's all. We don't have to fight it. We don't have to think we shouldn't be doing it, but we can. We can do all those things. The point is, my experience is, I don't learn anything if there's not some conflict in it. You know why? Because when things go my way, I'm just righteous about it. I just say, yeah, look at me. I'm not learning anymore. I'm just taking credit.
Yeah. I'm a very spiritual person until I hear no.
I never, ever, ever say that word, by the way. I think it's overused and it just doesn't even have any like weight.
What's
or
the word? No?
Spiritual.
Oh,
Just stupid. No, I know about the word no. I know that I hung out with these crazy, wealthy, pretty well-known vegans, and one of them I used to be her personal chef for, and she creates stories and then she goes, huh, Jana? And all I ever say is no, because usually the story surrounds me or my feelings, my relationships. And her friend that was there kept saying, I can't believe you would tell her no. I just smiled and laughed because it's just the thing that happens. I mean, she even says that she got in a motorcycle accident, so she's a little off anyway. But it was so funny. Every time she brings other people over, the third parties are always trying to protect her crazy. And I just let it go. But I'm not going to let somebody create a story and be a co-conspirator to it when it's not her story. It's my story.
Yeah.
And story.
I'm going to give you something else to think about this week, and also just reiterate a little bit about this near-death experience thing. We do not need to be near death to witness what we're experiencing. It must be with us wherever we are, and to be needing of an experience so extreme to finally push us back past our thoughts is evidence that we are chronically maintaining thoughts that are giving us an impression that is not true. And we're doing that in the present. And my suspicion is, as you're witness to, Jana, and you all are, to the degree that these things have occurred to you and you have those moments of clarity, is that as we talk about it and talk about it accurately and start to see that the things we think other people are doing is us once again trying to avoid admitting that's what we're doing because that's what we're thinking they're doing, is that they're giving us perspective. They're giving us a chance to have some room to notice what we're doing that we don't otherwise seem to have the room to do. And the freedom of the experience is not to avoid the conflicts and all that, but start to notice that those are the conflicts we're creating.
Thank you.
We're thinking aren't there, and that we need to overcome, and we need to stop, and we need to. The idea that we're letting go of something, Jana, is to start to see we never held on to anything. The fact that our fist was closed and ready to fight gave us the impression there was something in there. But when it's opened, there's nothing there. And it's very interesting in what you were talking about, Bruce Lee, with the one hand open and the one hand closed. One is ready to fight, the other one's wide open. We talk about letting go of things that aren't true, but if they aren't true, we never held on to them. But the ultimate letting go is letting go of the thought that we ever held on to anything that wasn't true. That in the present, there is anything that we're doing that isn't simply delusional. And if it's delusional, it's not actually happening, except to the point we keep thinking of it as true. That's the only thing that gives us that impression, that gives us this current experience of depression, anxiety, stress, chronic thinking, all of those things that are byproducts, irritability, restlessness, discontent, reactiveness, impulsiveness, compulsiveness. It's the only thing happening. We're creating it. We're doing it. We're causing it. It is the effect of the cause of our thinking. So I don't think we need to be near death to face those things, but I think we become so accustomed to thinking what we're doing is so normal that we need to be near the exit door before we can finally admit that they're not normal at all. And those people who come back from those experiences, if you listen to this or any of the other experiences, Dr. Bruce Grayson wrote a book on this. You will see that the experiences are very similar enough to suggest that we're already sharing something in common that's absolute in nature. It doesn't come and go when we think of it in ways that aren't true. It is absolutely where we are, as we are, always present, always available. And anything that suggests it isn't is a consequence of a thought that thinks it isn't. A thought that thinks it's real. A thought that thinks something that isn't true. That's it. So to be delusional is to see that you can't be delusional, but you can think you're delusional. And it's only again in thought. It's only what we're doing in thought. Like lies, there is no lie in the universe. And if there is, and there's some super force that's hell-bent on being a lie, it has absolutely no potential impact on us unless we're harboring a lie and then feel afraid of lying and think that that source can affect us. It's only because of what we're doing that gives us that impression. And if it's a lie, it's delusional. So it isn't really happening except to the thinking we're doing about it. It's just like a nightmare. We're always talking about wanting to achieve our dreams and forget that nightmares are dreams. We're just thinking about things that we're not happy to be thinking about, we're scared of.
That's funny.
But think of how real those seem. Think of how real those seem, and it gives some credence to the fact that we think what we're thinking is real too. And we're daydreaming. And often daydreaming about a nightmare because we're compulsively thinking about things in thought. And thought's an action. It's a primary action that leads to every voluntary decision we make or action we take.
Well, and I just feel like we think that something could be better than the here and now. And you hear that, and we've heard it from Ram Dass, and we've heard it throughout the years. I can actually get that now because seriously, I've lost a few people in the last couple of years. They're just not here anymore. And they still had litany of complaints and they were malcontent. And I'm kind of like, fuck, I don't want to reflect. I don't want that to be my life anymore. I don't want to have to
maybe they are here.
Pardon?
Maybe they are here, but what isn't here are all the idiosyncrasies that they thought were who they were, that were just personality traits they created by thinking they were a character in a play they created in their thinking.
Correct.
They're here. You can't go anywhere in an infinite source. You can't be anywhere else. It's always ever present. A body goes, but they call the body remains for a reason. There must be something that seems to leave that body. And yet that body is still filled with all of those other atoms and molecule, everything that it's, and basically is giving those back to the universe the same way it took them to originally create the body. Doesn't mean those beings aren't here. They're here with us.
Yes.
We know them as now not the idiosyncratic ideas we had about them, but as the being nature of our own experience. That's a lot different in terms of thinking because it begins to allow that awakened state to see that it isn't something that comes and goes, and it isn't something that begins or ends. If it's always beginning, there is no end.
It's the permanence of reality.
Yeah, and I would say outside of the universe, it isn't ever beginning because there is no time in the ultimate state of absolute infinite being. There is no time. Time is a concept, just like lies are a concept. Something that can happen within this structure and obviously seems to be happening, but it also, as we pointed out, bends with matter.
What was one of the big lies you found out after some point that you were telling yourself, Jack?
Anthony.
That's a good one. What's another one?
Jenna, were you done?
Somebody name a concept that they can defend that was true?
What's that?
Can anyone name a concept that they can defend the truth of?
No, there aren't any.
Right?
Concept? I thought there are.
Truth isn't a concept. Concepts are all what lies, ego, personality, time, space, all that stuff are effectively concepts. It's not to say that those things don't function in the universe and have an impact. It's just to say that time itself, if we're absolute light, if that's our nature, time has no impact on that whatsoever. So if time can be flexible, it's clearly a concept or a context within an absolute state that doesn't change. And the proof of that is that if everything changes, to your issue or question earlier, Everett, if everything changes, the one thing that doesn't change is that everything changes. So when you start seeing everything rather than some things and somebody, you start seeing things in absolute terms, which is why thinking in terms, how we started today, truth is true, reality is real, we are as we are. Those are truths. They're just simple. They're not complicated by more words trying to define truth. They're just serving the truth that they already are in absolute terms. Very great stability in that.
Because of the permanence of it.
Well, and the permanence is something we know, which is why we fight to prove our thoughts are true and real, and our thinking should be straightened out while it keeps getting broken. We're trying to fix it through fixation, and because we know what permanence is. We know that permanence is permanent because we know reality, because we know it. We are it. We wouldn't do that with our ego and our thoughts and our lies if we didn't know reality. We're trying to strive for it when we can't get there, not because we can't achieve it, but because we've already been given it. We're trying to get where we are, which is impossible because we're already there. The only thing we're struggling with is what we should or shouldn't be doing, what we like or don't like.
Yeah, but we shouldn't like or don't like anything. We should just rest in love.
If should is involved at all, it's a choice.
Correct. Mm-hmm. Correct. And everything's a choice. And so I 100,000% believe in fake it till you make it. That whole thing about pray for your enemy. I used to think it was the most foreign concept, sitting in Palisades Park with some militant fucking sponsor going, go ahead and meet me every day here for 60 days and pray for that motherfucker. And I was like, no, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. And now it just seems laughable to me that I would even indulge in thinking that anyone was thinking something differently than me. I seriously, what a fucking idiot. Why would I be entitled to judge somebody because they think this and I think that? And
well, you are entitled.
I don't have to ever do that. And I always felt kind of.
But you probably will. You probably will.
Of course I will, but
the point is, we're not condemned by any of it until we think we shouldn't do it. Because if we're doing something, why not just admit we're doing what we're doing rather than think we shouldn't be doing what we're doing? That's a conflict.
My whole life.
What's that?
You don't think I've done that my whole life?
What's that? The shoulding or the?
No, admitting what I've done. I mean, I've always been, there's no secrets with me. I've been pretty open.
Well, pretty open and open are two different things. I would suggest, if the Course in Miracles says that if anyone ever forgave everything, literally means let everything be.
I wouldn't be here anymore. I'd be on the next.
No. Everyone would simultaneously get it.
Yeah.
So to the degree that anyone isn't getting this yet, we apparently haven't admitted it clearly. So I would suggest, as good as you may feel, as much as you may have done, it may be that the more of it isn't a function of thinking more, but starting to actually recognize that being is never more than less than everything that there is. And that's your natural state. That's who you are, not what you think.
Correct. And that's the beauty of it. There is no better. There is no wrong. There is no fear.
There is within thinking, though.
Love, and we're all connected and we're all in this together. And when Anthony's looking at stupid Porsches and wondering why he doesn't have the 1979 Cabriolet, I'm thinking, dude, settle into love. Just do it.
But he's doing what he's doing, regardless of what you're thinking.
We're clear on that.
Yeah.
Funny thing is, I just sold an 83 Cabriolet. I'm doing a different switch.
So within our human experience, we like things and don't like things. We prefer things and we don't prefer other things. We have certain obligations to feed ourselves and warm ourselves and do things. And those things are going to run into consequences that we're not always going to like. It isn't a requirement that we like everything, but the chances are we're going to go more with what we like than what we don't like. And my tendency and what I've learned is that I prefer winning. I don't prefer losing. I prefer being successful in what I do. I prefer making choices that are actually productive because they work and align with how things are in this universe in terms of our functional capacity. That's important enough for me to want to do.
Functional capacity.
What's that?
In terms of our functional capacity, you always say a few things, no matter how long we're chatting or I'm being a witness to what you're saying. There's always something that just is such a trinket. And I have these all in a notebook, by the way. Someday I'll send them. I have like 8 notebooks of your quotes. And they all give me relief I don't know, you know what I mean? Like in the things you say give me permission to be in my human capacity, even though I know that I'm a spiritual being and we're all connected. But the fallacies that I make as a human, you gift me that, and you never flinch. And I've said horrifying things to you, like in a confession booth, just you and I on the phone, and you never flinch.
I probably wasn't listening.
That was
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No, I appreciate that, Jana. I listen. The flexibility of all this is noticing that within our human experiences, there are choices and there are options. The difference is we are not condemned to any of them, but we can think we are as quickly as we think what we're thinking is true and real. We will face those consequences. And to think we shouldn't face them is to think we're not creating them. And as we begin to get facile in that, which is facility, the ability to function, it becomes more obvious that running up against these things are probably things we're going to do 100 times a day, 1,000 times a day. And it's okay. It doesn't have to go where we think it is. And we can start noticing that maybe there's a greater fascination in things going where they actually go than where we think they might or want them to. And that becomes, we can still want it, not be addicted to the idea that they have to be that way.
Yes.
We can still have all those things.
That there has to be some little chink to my chemicals in my brain because I said the right thing or the right thing happened. That doesn't have to be. That's the neutrality and the acceptance. But still, I miss the roller coaster sometimes.
Well, you'll create it if you miss it. And don't worry about that queasiness will occur to you. And I think part of the other aspect of this, in the same way that we're talking about near-death experiences and being able to witness this absolute awareness that we have with clarity, is that our bodies in that witness, I don't think need to be in comas or drug-induced states to do this. And I suspect that a lot of the chemicals that we use and abuse and overuse in our body that cause this sense of well-being or the lack of well-being haven't even begun to create the potential we have to allow our bodies to do things and heal over things that seem impossible today, because we have been thinking in impossible ways. It would certainly seem impossible to allow our body to function. Our brains have more potential than any computer that's ever been developed thus far. And we've done a pretty good job of developing computers so far. But our brains are much better calculators than all the computers that are yet developed. Doesn't mean that we're thinking right enough to begin to witness and express that. But my suspicion is, as we begin to concede this awareness is our natural state, we'll start becoming aware of things and producing results that go so far beyond what we've imagined that seem miraculous, when in fact it was miraculous that we lived for eons and centuries and millennia, which would be less than eons, thinking it wasn't true, thinking it wasn't possible. The miracle is that we could believe that thinking. It's not a miracle to begin to actually function on the basis of our natural existence at all. It's not a miracle at all. It's natural. And it shouldn't feel exceptional. It should feel like coming home, like you described earlier, that sense of place. I think Everett said that. That sense of place, belonging, noticing that we're always where we are. Go ahead, Jenna.
No, Everett said that about you, and it was the most beautiful thing ever, that he felt the first time he heard you, he was home. And that's there's no higher thing than acceptance.
It was spooky. It was spooky.
Well,
in a beautiful way.
When your clarity, I think you might have thought I was spooky in what I said, but my sense is when we start
no. It wasn't what you said. It was how I felt. It was it transcended words.
But my sense is too that the clarity, Everett, gives us a chance to see the sort of spooky nature of the conjured ideas we have that are illusions turn to delusions when we think that they're truth. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That the witness, at the same time, the clarity of that all-knowing also gives us clarity to what we're doing. And that's what this conversation is largely aimed at. as we can notice from the absolute state of awareness that we have what we're doing wrong, we don't have to change it, but the freedom to do it and change it, just start seeing it's always been changing. The question is, do I want to make it worse or do I want to make it better? Do I want to be more effective for more people or do I want to be more destructive for more people? That's the question. And the fulfillment is seeing other people benefit and seeing other people grow and seeing other people with, if everybody's already got this, and we start functioning on that basis collectively, like we're working on doing here, my sense is that's going to be a profound shift in the decisions we make collectively, because we're going to be thinking aligned with an absolute state of knowing that isn't desperate, rather than simply thinking about thinking that's always desperate, because we know it's only thinking about a very limited amount of information, because it's sealed off in this looping vicious cycle of trying to serve itself and think there's a self to serve.
Okay, you just said something insanely profound. An absolute state of being that
I hope it's not insanely profound.
No, it's a beautiful absolute state of being that isn't desperate. And that's when we allow ourselves to exhale and rest in love.
No, it's right here, right now, regardless of what we think. We don't have to rest. We don't have to experience it for it to be. And to any degree we're not experiencing it, we're thinking of it inaccurately. And that rhymes. We don't have to experience it for it to be, and anything we're not experiencing, and anytime we're not experiencing it, we're just not thinking about it accurately. That's all. So keep in mind to your acceptance thing, Jenna.
But when you say that, like when I'm anywhere else than where I am, and you like I'm not thinking about it accurately, sometimes I can get in my head and feel like when I conjure things up, then I feel shame.
Yeah. You know why?
It's painful. And then I go,
because you're ashamed.
Why would I judge myself when I'm so happy to be a witness to my friend? It was the most lovely thing. And then I'm like, you know what that is? That's me projecting love from me onto her. That's what I have always strived for. And to be able to do that and not want anything back other than the neutrality of just not judging.
Well, starting to see it, Jenna, not as something you're doing, but something that exists without any doing whatsoever, is to see that there's no effort in it at all. And it's already a natural state for everything and everyone.
Yes.
And that shame you're talking about, because I have experienced that my whole life. It comes naturally for being ashamed. For when we feel ashamed and guilty, we're actually guilty for the shame we're creating by thinking things that aren't true are real and true. That's all that it is. We're witnessing it clearly, and to see it clearly is to be on notice and literally like the road signs telling us that there's a 15-mile-an-hour curve ahead. And if we're doing 80, it might not be convenient, but it's probably sensible to slow down and just start to make note of these things that are obviously being conveyed to us.
Well, something I have to notice is in the history of me, I didn't feel shame growing up. I didn't know that we were poor. I didn't know there was lack. I didn't know there was dysfunction. I just knew that no matter what, we were all together. No matter what, we were a team. Even when we were against each other inside our little thing, my mom, then an older brother, me in the middle, and a younger brother. And in therapy, it was a horrifying distance, and that, of course I'm jacked, but whatever. I still to this day feel like we were all in it together then. We're all in it together now.
Well, if we have the capacity today to make believe we're not doing what we're doing in any degree,
right,
you might want to imagine that some of your memories might have been doing the same thing then that you're able to do now, and yet you're thinking of it in terms that gives you an impression something was better then than it is now, because something.
No, not better than.
I'm just suggesting. I'm not suggesting it's happening. I'm just suggesting that those impressions can be made through the presumption that how we thought of it then was all that was happening, rather than begin to realize there was probably more happening than we were thinking.
Okay.
Because there's always more happening than we're thinking.
Okay, that makes sense because people that judged it were like rehab said you had a horrifying thing when I was my childhood growing up.
Do you feel like bacon? Oops, sorry. I'm sorry. No, please excuse me, Jen.
No, I was just saying, like, I never felt there was any lack in my life ever. Even I just never did until many years later in rehab when they were like, well, that was kind of a horrifying existence. And I was kind of saying, this is what happened, how I grew up, and that's why I am who I am. It was just a whole different version of things. I mean, they were like, no, you were neglected and stuff. You had no parenting. And I was like, what are you kidding? I was an entrepreneur. Everything was great. So it's just truly all about perception. And I think I knew that early on. And I just felt lacking because I wasn't judging things. I didn't have opinions on political things. I just haven't ever had opinions. I've been pretty accepting, even regardless of the fact that I miraculously forged forward in my business and stuff and made it and lost it and all of that. I just never had a stance, and it made me feel kind of unsmart and ugly because I should have been either a Republican or I should have been a liberal or I should have had more opinions. And now today I'm kind of grateful that I was a dumbass and didn't have opinions.
Well, what we're doing now is the culmination of everything that we have ever
You weren't
done
a dumbass.
in terms of what we think. This week, we have a week ahead of us, and we're
Okay.
going to see each other again next week, I believe. What is today, the 8th? So that'll be the 15th. Given that this isn't a claim of truth and reality, just a suggestion that if truth is true and reality is reality, it's probably worth mentioning, and allowing to exist in a way that's simple rather than conflicted with other ideas about what we think it is, and give a stable basis to thinking. During the week, give some consideration to how you are interacting with people and how honest you are in those interactions. That doesn't mean be blatantly hostile with them when you feel hostile, but start to notice the hostility is what you're doing. It has nothing to do with them. And you can always talk about those things openly with people and claim that what you're doing by what you're thinking, rather than aim it at them and think you're going to fix it.
But what about the other side of that? You said a stable basis to thinking how you're reacting to people. What if you're literally like so in the love that you're not reacting? Is that lack too? Should I have more of an opinion? Should I be more?
No. You go with where you are. I would only suggest that when there are points where the freedom is so obvious and so palpable because it's so new.
Oh,
but it doesn't mean that there isn't something else lurking that we won't find. And the reason I mention that is because I've done this long enough where people get to points where they think, that's it, I found it. Because they're literally experiencing that sense of freedom for the first time in their life, or in a way that's so different that was sort of simulated by their drinking or their drugging, but it's free and they realize it. And I would say that's actually it. But the problem is that to any degree that we run into circumstances that seem to overwhelm us or don't go the way we think they should, a lot of times we freeze up very quickly because our history and our body is almost primed to react. And again, this is another narrative that I'm creating, and it may not be absolutely true for anyone. And ultimately, all of those things like you're describing, Jenna, lies and ego and all that stuff are concepts anyhow. So we're really not doing what we're doing. We're just thinking we're doing what we're doing. And as a result, we're functioning on a basis that's dysfunctional when in fact the functioning basis is absolutely intact. We're just acting out in ways that are not helpful and can be hurtful. And my sense is the global effort is to look at things collectively enough that we start seeing things that are similar and identical for each other, the same rather than different, so that we're thinking in terms that are principled enough to be global in terms of thinking and have an impact that is constructive for everyone in the same way that we've been having one that's destructive for everyone.
Yes.
And it's just a shift. It's just starting to notice that. it isn't the claim that, okay, I've received this freedom and now I'm there and I'm never going to leave and I can't do all these other things. The fact is we can do everything that's possible. And what's absolutely possible is to think we can do the impossible. It's always possible to think that. It's going to subject us to a difficult course, and it's going to have life appear to be impossible for a minute until the experience says, oh, if I'm thinking that, I must be doing that. And it's not who I am, it's something I'm choosing to think. That's it. It isn't a thought. It isn't any more than a thought.
Your assignment is.
Guys, I love you. I have a 6-year-old calling me. I have to make him breakfast. Aloha.
Love you,
Yeah, thanks,
Jana.
Jana.
Thanks for
All
your
right.
honesty.
Guys,
It's beautiful
Jana.
to witness.
Yeah.
Your assignment, Jack. Your assignment, Jack, is going to be very challenging
Enjoy
for
your
me
friend,
because
Jen.
your assignment is going to be really challenging for me because I have a meeting this week. It's supposed to happen this week. It was supposed to happen last week, where I'm supposed to be fired after 3 years of employment.
You know you're getting fired and you're going to a meeting where you know you're going to be fired, or this is like speculation?
Not just that, but
Like a scheduled execution.
I am being paid. It really is. I am being paid to stay home right now.
Wow. How does that feel?
Well, you ought to see if you could do that for another 3 years.
Yeah,
I know, right?
You know what our next question is going to be, right? BLKMKRT trademark.
So the point of
it's
facing it, Everett, is just what's going to happen is going to happen. It doesn't mean that it's predetermined. It means that you're going to go in there and you're going to have a chance to actually confront something that may be difficult, but you also have a chance to be honest about your place. You don't have to be defensive, but there's probably going to be some of that tied to it, connected to it.
Well, it's actually, yeah, no, it's interesting because, well, the politics of it is that I'm a union steward, and they're crushing the union where I work, and I'm the in their eyes the head of the snake of the department. So if they cut the head of the snake off, then everyone will be scared. So so without getting into all the details of it all, so they've built a case in order to justify being able to fire me. And it's here in Los Angeles. There's a big strike that's coming up in Los Angeles in food and beverage for hotels because they're negotiating contracts. And so the hotels that are union hotels are all binding together, and it's the owners against the union type of thing. So it was right before New Year's. As I was getting ready to go to work, I got the email that not to come into work, that I'd be paid until a meeting that was supposed to happen last Thursday would transpire, where my union rep knows that I'm going to be fired. So I'm literally walking in there for them to officially do that. And then we take things from there. But it's interesting that you gave this assignment when I have this in the background of my mind.
Yeah. And it's probably been very much on your mind, and there's probably lots of thoughts flying around about it and the rights and the wrongs and all that. And, it's going to go where it goes. If everything that's ever happened has gotten you to where you are, and it included those 3 years, which I think you were pretty happy with and appreciated the structure of the management, well, that may not be the same currently. There's a good chance that something here that is hard to see is not only more than possible, but probable. And the tendency, when I think of these things in terms only according to the thinking I'm doing, I always think of the worst case because I'm thinking with the worst case. I'm already using the worst case in my thinking to think about it, rather than the knowing case of an absolute awareness, realizing this is just another turn that I didn't expect, that seems difficult because I don't want to make it.
Yeah.
And actually be open to it. Now, in my experience, that's often led to things within the structure of what I was sure was going to happen to end up not happening the way I was sure of, and end up being something that was completely different, whether it was immediate or subsequent.
No, and I've learned that through sobriety, that again, every maybe taking the deaths of my father and my sister out of the equation, it's like everything that I thought was atrocious, like really, really bad, have been really big blessings. And so with that in mind, and when I think about all of the drama, trying to get sober and feeling like the next problem was the problem that's going to really just, take me down. Britt and I say it to ourselves all the time, we've gotten this far. Every time we thought that was the last one was the one, we find ourselves where we are, which
good and bad are intimately connected. And the positions we take on the spectrum between them are positions we choose. That's it. And if I think that position, like my thought that chose it, is real and true, I'm going to think there is no other place to be but defend that position on that spectrum and think the rest of that spectrum is impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And to think that way is to always only think the worst case scenario, because I'm thinking in the worst way, like I just said, but I'm repeating it in a different way. As I think in the worst way, I'm only going to imagine the worst thing. Why? Because it's reflecting the thinking I'm doing immediately and accurately. The same, my anxiety reflects the fact that I'm thinking things that aren't true to be causing the anxiety to be witnessing. Now, this doesn't mean there isn't something outside of me, like a bear, that could cause that anxiety. But the fact is, if I actually look at my experience accurately, I notice that 99% of the time, there's never been a bear and there's never been any major threat. And the major threat that I've lived with is the one I'm creating in what I call my inside, and think that nobody else notices it, when in fact it's affecting everything I do and everything I say and how I appear and how I show up and what I'm able to accomplish in every way. And I think nobody notices.
Mm-hmm.
I keep it to myself because I don't talk about it, because I don't mention it. That's loopy.
As within, so
Nutty.
without. Yeah.
It's
Our
extra
outsides
crunchy.
reflect our outsides reflect our insides.
Well, we're interactive and we are aware of everything that's going on. We are the sum total of everything that's going on. We are witnessing everything. And what I'm thinking about it, that clarity of our witness, isn't thinking. Our senses don't think, they just provide information. Our nerves don't think, they provide information. And what our brain does with it, what I do with it, often creates greater harm than the information being fed to me that's hard sometimes to feel. I cause the pain. I cause the harm. I create the harm to justify the thinking I'm doing that's harmful, to make believe it's the exterior that's happening. I create the problems on the exterior to be sure that I have something to justify the thinking I'm doing on seemingly the interior. But my interior thinking is constantly interacting with everything, everywhere. It isn't separate, but to the thinking I'm doing. So that awareness in going into it's interesting, is the fear, the self-centered fear faded for me. And it's not that it's gone. I'm just more aware of it now and I know what it is. I see it for what it is and it dissipates quicker. I confront situations that used to bother me much more readily and enjoy it rather than avoid them. And other situations that I used to face easily now have become a pain in the ass.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like if I flip things over, things tend to get shaken up.
It is interesting. When I found out on Thursday, because Thursday I was supposed to have that meeting, I was so ready for it. And then my union rep contacted me and said, they're actually postponing for next week. I was so upset. I want to take the next steps. I want to move on. Either way.
Well, everything right now is a moving experience, because you are a current event right now. And a current, if you think about it, is not only present, but fluid. It's current. There's a flow, like electricity. It isn't the electricity that's getting here that helps us. It's the electricity that's here that charges the battery and lights up the phone and all that. It's not somewhere else. It's what we're doing now that's actually the effective actual reality of what we're doing. It's how we're doing it is how it is. Doesn't make it real in the real sense, but to the sum total of our thinking, certainly what we're doing is a lot more palatable as reality than thinking what we're not doing is all that's real. big difference in that. At least what we're doing is happening. And I would say what's happening is probably as close as we get to reality on a physical basis, because it is all reality, whether we see it or not, or think it's happening. The present nature of reality isn't happening. It's just a present nature of reality. And everything subsequent to that is part of it. Everything that's happening, every molecule, every proton and neutron, and all of them, they're all happening as a result of this reality. Whether it's a concept, an illusion, a thought, consciousness, whatever it is, it is. Whatever it is, it's allowing for what's happening to be happening is enough to know about what's happening. And it sort of puts to rest all that thinking and meandering to allow us to actually realize, I can do whatever I want. I've been doing it all along and doing sick shit, pretending it was the only thing I could do. And if I can do that for a lifetime, certainly I could be open to doing whatever I want freely, without the contempt and without the condemnation and the spite and the loathing and all the things that go with that other form of thought. It's a jewel in the crown that's a jewel. Paul, glad to have you today.
So appreciate you all. And thanks, for just all the, I think, raw honesty today. It's beautiful to be a part of.
Thank you, Laura.
Yes, I'm great to be here too. And this is my first time. However, I'm taking what I can understand and trying to be patient, because a lot of things like doesn't make sense for me.
Yeah.
But I'm really grateful to be here, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, and Paul, during the
Welcome.
week, just notice that sometimes when you're considering things that don't line up to what you think, it seems hard to understand because you're used to understanding what you think as being all that there is. And this knowing nature isn't something that any of us understand or need to, because we already know it. There's nothing to, understanding is always trying to know, like reason is always trying to know, right?
Yes.
So this is beginning to understand that if we already know, we know, there's nothing to understand but that. And that simplifies the whole, then the complications of the thought start to become apparent. And generally that leads to, oh shit, or holy shit, because you begin to realize that pretty much everything you've ever thought of yourself has simply been what you thought. And yet this essence is actually a glowing, radiant awareness that if it is true and if it is real, that would be something to perhaps pay attention to, rather than pay attention to all the thoughts that told me I had to think right to get to it, which never seemed to happen because I never seemed to get where I thought I was going. And when I did, I often found I wasn't where I thought I'd be, but I liked where I ended up better than what I thought would happen. There's often that too, Everett, that ending up where we are. A lot of times we find so much more than we imagine, because all we're imagining is the limited thoughts we're thinking are true or ever going to happen. But reality doesn't limit thoughts. It's a choice we have. It's just what we do. So this is an intro. We can always talk to at any time you like, and I can infill this with 12 or 15 hours worth of constant conversation. So
I'm so
And then
blown
is this
away.
where you do? Is this where you do the disclaimer at the end, where you say if you have other needs, there's professionals that seek help?
well,
Oh,
I think that's your
Anthony.
job, Anthony.
Yeah, this is the opinions expressed here do not necessarily represent all of Jack Hoffman's ideas. But if you do need outside help, as they say, make sure you seek it. This is a non-licensed show. We're not suggesting you do anything or without consulting a doctor first.
Well, not everybody needs a doctor to actually talk to somebody. And I would suggest that the point you're making, Anthony, is that there is help and there are options that are near us. And they aren't far off and they aren't hard to find. And if you look, I would suggest you will always find. And if what you've been looking for is trouble, you've always found it. That's pretty good confirmation that if you're looking for a solution, you'll find it too. And there are options, and it comes in many forms, many forms. So I don't limit it to anything if it's possible in any way. I want everyone to know that they have a greater guidance system. And as they begin to recognize that, the choices they're going to make are going to actually be effective rather than defective. They're going to see success rather than failure. And if they find failure, they're going to realize it's a guidance system to help correct the thinking they're doing, rather than who they are and some character thing that is impossible to overcome. It's not impossible at all. It's just a thought to begin with. So,
since this meeting doesn't have any rules or anything that, well, at least that I know of, I feel like I just want to share that I am so blown away by Paul. Paul is, first of all, he's digesting all this in a second language. He's Hungarian. And I find what we talk about challenging. I think most of us will agree, just to be digesting it in English, and it's my first language. But also Paul is 7 days sober, man. I'm just so freaking proud of you. I'm
Congratulations.
I'm sorry for outing you. Don't hate me. I'm just so excited. And that he's exploring, what sobriety means, and it's just very exciting for me to witness. And I want to thank him for sharing himself with us.
welcome to another New Day Sober, Paul.
Thank you. Well, this is my very first AA meeting. Like a really first.
It's not, but it's not an AA meeting. But yeah. I know what you mean.
Yeah, this is a meeting when I'm like, especially taking the time to like, I would love to join such a great little private group or community, as is right now here with Jack and with you guys. And yeah, I'm grateful to be here.
Welcome.
Thank you for coming, Paul. I enjoyed our time last week and look forward to continuing, and I'm thankful that you looped around and followed up on showing up very much.
Happy to be here. Thank you, Jack.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
See you guys next week. Anytime in between is fine. And I love you.
All right. Love you. Love all of you.
Thanks, guys.
Take care.
Take care, guys. Bye.